What's the wildest level of passive aggression that you've ever seen? Me talking to a client. Listen, I can do this for you, but you're behind on your invoices. You really need to get caught up. Well, how much do I owe you? Well, including the last job, it's $1,500. Okay, well, I'm confident we can get that to you by the end of the week. 3 weeks later, hi, just following up to see where we are on that payment. No response from the client. 2 weeks later, they write to me. Hello, our site is down. Can you get it back up for us? I'm confident I can get it back up by the end of the week. Long time ago in my first managerial position, I had a boss who got angry at me for somewhat ridiculous reasons. I was trying to plan out a potential project with one of my staff members, and my boss overheard us. He assumed we were going to skip other work to get this request done, when, in fact, avoiding that was exactly why I was having the meeting. At any rate, he came in and absolutely dressed me down in front of my project guy. After shift change, I went to his office and he told me he didn't want me to make any decisions without running them past him first. So, for the next week, literally every decision I made, I paged him first. Like, can Tom take his break half an hour early? Or, could Sally have extra supplies? 1 week later, he blew up at my co-supervisor at a staff meeting saying, "Seriously, you all need to be able to make some decisions yourselves." So, my passive-aggressive response worked just fine. I live in a house with thin walls and squeaky floors. My housemate, whose room is across from mine, has always been active at night. That's when he practices his singing, makes phone calls, and stomps around the house, slamming the doors behind him. It was a little annoying, but harmless, until I started my surgery clerkship last year. This meant waking at 4 in the morning every Monday through Saturday. A few days before I was to begin, I spoke with my housemate and I gave him a heads up, asking very politely if he could keep it down after 9 p.m. In return, I would be as quiet as possible in the morning and move my morning routine, like shower, lunch prep, etc., to the evening. He agreed, but didn't actually change anything. 3 weeks into my first week of surgery, after one too many instances of our bathroom's door being slammed too hard late at night, I decided to move my shower to 3:30 a.m. and parked directly outside of his bedroom window. My car is old and the engine is loud. It took just over a week of being woken at 3:30, but now he's quiet by 8. That'll do it. Why should you show consideration to someone who's showing no consideration to you? In fairness to him, it seems like maybe he just didn't think about it that much until he had a picture of what it was like from your perspective. For a programming class, me and some friends created a tic-tac-toe bot that always ended games in a draw. It wasn't designed to win, only to end games in a draw. The best way to be passive-aggressive to a trophy store is to order a worst trophy shop trophy and then never pick it up. It was at work. I bake stuff and bring it in for my co-workers pretty frequently. One of our administrators brought in some brownies on a day that I'd bought in cookies. She took that personally and actually removed my cookies from the common area and hid them in her office so that only her brownies were available. So I went to her office, reclaimed my Tupperware, and told her that I'd keep the cookies in my office until her brownies were gone. On the way out of her office, the systems guy came by and was like, "Dude, where did the cookies go? We thought they were out. Can we have some?" Of course, I said yes and passed out cookies while half standing in our administrator's office while she stared daggers at me. Duolingo sent a notification to my phone once saying, "Well, it seems like our notification isn't doing anything, so we'll stop sending them." I used to do laundry at a funky laundromat in the UK. For some reason, they put a 15-inch shelf below the doors of the dryers for people to put their baskets on as they emptied the dryer. On a very busy day, one idiot decided to fold his clothes individually on this shelf instead of moving everything to a table and freeing up the dryer. To make things worse, he was minutely examining every item he pulled out of the dryer. A woman very nicely asked him if he wouldn't mind moving to a table so she could use the dryer. This elicited a very astounding display of profanity and rudeness that had me wondering if this guy had Tourette's or something. The lady realized she was dealing with an absolute jerk and backed off, rather disappointingly, I thought. She found another dryer and sat down again. A few minutes later, this idiot finishes his folding and is still blocking the dryer with all the folded stuff. He goes to get a rolling cart to take his stuff to the car. The lady sees her chance and grabs it, opens the dryer door, throws in all of his carefully folded stuff, and feeds the coin slot. The guy went ballistic when he came back, but somehow, nobody in the entire place had seen what happened. A couple of years, 2012 or something, I was in high school attending a computer science class. The exercises were so outdated that they stated we had to hand it in on a floppy disk. So I did. When I was still married, my ex's parents' Christmas gift to us one year was that they offered to pay for me to have a vasectomy. We hadn't discussed anything even broaching that subject with them. Personally, I asked my girlfriend at the time if she would mind if I hung out with my ex and some friends after school. You know, a simple no would have sufficed. Instead, she responded with, "I don't mind. I guess I'll hang out with my friend Eric. We usually get drunk and make out." My high school chemistry teacher hated my friends and me. We started it all by being high school idiots, but we were going to finish it as well. My friend would often crumple up his lab sheet and then flatten it out before handing it in. After doing this a couple of times, she said he'd get a 0 the next time he did it. So after we finished our next lab, he asked to go to the bathroom. He took his sheet to the library, crumpled it up, flattened it out, and then photocopies it. Comes back and turns in the very flat but crumpled-looking piece of paper. Had a former co-worker that when writing his child support payment check to his ex-wife, he would address the envelope to his wife with her first name, and then all 3 surnames of her various ex-husbands struck through before writing the surname of the current one. To note, the marriage didn't end well as he caught her cheating. Then she cheated on the next one, and the next one. I was working the morning at the counter and we just opened the shop. Not even around 20 minutes had passed by and this older lady comes up to the counter with her granddaughter and shows me her old battery in her hand with an annoyed look on her face like I'd peed in her cereal. It was her old battery that she was just handing to me. Not from the store, she gave me no conversation, just stared into my soul. It was very surreal. I stared at her for a couple of seconds and she sighs, pauses and then says, "Batteries." I stared at her and with the politest tone I could muster, I tell her they're just to the front of the counter, around 2 steps away, and she starts looking at USB sticks. I say in my most polite and pleasant voice with as much bubbliness as I could muster, "Oh no, not there, just to the left," and she spots them. I tell her she's got it and continue my business. She grabs the battery she needs, but then pauses and dramatically says, "You know what? I'm not going to buy these. I'll go to another store that will have decent customer service who'll help me," and she storms out while her grandchild is staring at her like a confused Bambi. I said, "Okay, goodbye," as soon as she said that and she stormed out with her very confused granddaughter. There are harsher demons to care about in retail beyond a passive-aggressive woman who expected me to mind read and didn't politely ask for my help. Besides, it was 20 minutes after we opened. I wasn't awake enough to care. When I did sushi samples, I wouldn't tell the customer to have a great day if they were rude, just a good one. Now listen here. I know that we came here to do a video on passive aggression, but this outright hostility is just taking things a bit too far. How can we live in a world of such rampant spite? I think I need to sit down. My wife and I have been planning on going on a weekend-long couples retreat for 3 months. We lined up the babysitters, her parents and mine, set aside the necessary funds and waited in anticipation. The weekend finally comes, we drop off the kids at my folks' place because they're watching them for one night. They can't watch the kids for a second night because of a play my younger sister was involved in. There was also a storm happening at the same location our retreat was planned. My mother-in-law is a fearmonger and told us not to go because she feared for our safety. The place we were headed to got storms frequently, and occasionally there was a tree that fell over, but that's about it. Anyway, she really doesn't want us to go, but my wife and I need a break from the kids, so we say we're going anyways. She then calls my wife and spends a half hour on the phone crying to her. Literally crying about not going for fear of her child dying and leaving her grandchildren orphaned. Sunday evening, when we return, we find out that she had picked up the kids that day at noon, meaning she had left them at my parents' place the night before, so my mother wasn't able to go and watch her daughter perform in the play. We asked her why she backed out and she said she was too stressed to deal with the children. She bailed on watching her grandkids for a night because we went on a trip that she thought was too dangerous, causing issues with my parents. I was riding on the bus at 7 a.m. after a 3 p.m. to 6 a.m. double shift. Needless to say, I was tired as all hell. Now, this specific route tends to be very crowded in the mornings, but my work was near the start of it, so I'd always get a seat and then proceed to fall asleep in it. So this group of middle-aged women got up at the next stop, and now the bus is full. So one of them stands next to me and says, "I guess there are no more gentlemen in this world." So I did what my half-asleep mind wanted and proceeded to say, "Oh, sorry, yes there are. I'm afraid seats are what we're short of." And I proceeded to fall back asleep. Yeah, that was an uncomfortable 45-minute ride home. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. So I feel really bad about this now, but I was at a subway, sandwiches, not the underground train, and there was a bus of Chinese tourists in front of me in line. They took a while to order because they spoke mostly broken English, but they got through it. Now I walk up and I hear the subway lady mutter under her breath, "Great, another fricking chink." I'm also Asian, by the way. Now I understand that dealing with a bunch of tourists who ordered in broken English is hard, but this really set me off. I proceeded to order being the most indecisive I can while using the most broken English I can, adding in random ching chong and ling long and every other ridiculous rhyming iteration that I can, and just proceed to waste her time. Now, when I finally get to the cashier, I have a sandwich which has been remade 3 times because the sandwich lady misunderstood me because of my bad English, and piled high with every single topping and sauce. I go up to pay and then say in perfect English, "You know, racism really makes me lose my appetite. Keep the sandwich." And then I walked out nonchalantly, treasuring the look of pure rage on the subway lady's face. My name is Anthony. For 25 years, I've had to do the annoying task of just dealing with people assuming they may call me Tony. First time, no big deal. Just a quick correction and we're on with our days. The only pass I give is really old people because maybe the name reminds them of a grandchild they lost to polio or whatever. I don't know people's lives and I'm not trying to make people cry on their final days. Anyways, I had a teacher in high school that would constantly call me Tony. Even after correcting her, and sometimes on that same day, I started to just flat out ignore her Tony calls. One time she kept saying it until the entire class turned around to look at me to see why I was silent. I did the ironic look back behind me to look at the wall. Last day of class, when she finally started to call me Anthony, I signed my final paper, Tony. Frick you, Miss D. Back during my degree, I was doing an essay about typographical trends. My lecturer and I had a disagreement about something to do with another project, something about a display or something, I don't quite recall. I handed him the essay on time, but with each word successively in Arial, Helvetica, and Gill Sans. Drove him nuts. When I was in high school, we had an oil painting unit in our art class. Oil paint is expensive, so we were given really small tubes and told to use only as much as we needed. Well, we were painting in a lot of fall kind of colors, things like squash, gourds, among others. Needless to say, there was a lot of yellow in these compositions, and most people used up their yellow tubes right away. There was this upperclassman girl in my class that was a total stuck-up snob, and took every chance she could to throw me under the bus for some reason. I think she thought I was a threat to her because we were both very artistically inclined, although the extent of her abilities was just copying paintings that she found online. Anyways, we all kept our paints in shoeboxes, and one day I went to class to find that my nearly full tube of yellow paint was gone. I look over and sure enough, the upperclassman snob has it. I was mad, but I didn't want to make a scene. So I went up to her and asked, "Hey, can I borrow some of your yellow?" She looks at me, gives me the snobbiest, most disgusted look I've ever seen in my life and says, "Only a little bit." That was the last straw. I took the tube and squeezed the entire thing onto my palette. It was oil paint, so I was able to keep it wet until I was done with it. A sign from a quality inn. Dear guests, due to the popularity of our guest room amenities, our housekeeping department now offers these items for sale. Alarm clocks, $25. Coffee maker, $50. Hairdryer, $45. With an ongoing list going all the way to towels, fridges, and bed sheets. Each guest room attendant is responsible for maintaining the guest room items. Should you decide to take these articles from your room instead of obtaining them from the executive housekeeper, we'll assume you approve a corresponding charge to your account. Thank you. Maybe a sad but necessary measure if your items are always being stolen. That's why the narrator only steals things from other people's rooms. The biggest one I've done? In high school, my English teacher hated Wikipedia with a passion, saying it's unreliable and anyone can edit it. So, for my research paper, I proved Wikipedia was a reliable source and not everyone can edit pages. She hated it so much and constantly asked me to write about something different. I had an English teacher I really disliked in high school. She was one of those grammar purists. I'm pretty sure if she knew that I used the singular word they, she'd yell. So she drank like 3 Pepsis a day and then one day decided to give up Pepsi to improve her health. So I came in with a bottle of Pepsi the next day and drank it nonchalantly during class. I don't even like Pepsi. At the mall, sitting in a chair waiting for someone, a woman with a cane walks up to the seating area and says to herself, "All the seats are taken, I'll just have to hope I don't fall down." Someone then offers her a seat and 2 minutes later she says something about it being long enough and gets up and walks off again. Playing a martyr was apparently more important than sitting down. I used to shower at work. To cut down on hauling stuff back and forth, I bought a large shampoo container to work as well as a bar of soap. I placed the shampoo off in an unused corner out of the way of anyone else's stuff. A week later, the shampoo was almost completely gone even though I'd only got to use it once. I left a note on the shampoo itself, "Don't use my shampoo, bring your own." A couple of days later, the shampoo was almost completely empty. So I tinkled in it. That's right, I went #1 in my shampoo bottle. I filled the bottle with my sweet wee-wee and then left it there. 2 days later, I found the bottle in one of the shower stalls. The top of it was off and it was lying on the shower floor on its side. I never knew who was using my shampoo, but I have a vision in my mind's eye of what happened when they used it the last time. When I was in college, I was in a group project called Capstone, where we built an entire enterprise network including host, branches, and servers, everything that we'd learned. Well, 2 people that I was supposed to be working with didn't do anything at all. I asked my instructor if I could be reassigned or work alone, to which he told me no. So I worked independently anyway. I made a network, but when it came time to present, I completely bombed it on purpose. I did no servers, I used basic DSL to the public internet for my only connection to the host, and used free DNS to do my DNS because I cheaped out on static IPs. I used static routing for everything. No switching, no port security, a complete bomb. My group project received a 15% on our capstone and caused my 2 group mates to fail out of the capstone project. That night, I emailed a PowerPoint presentation, project documentation and timeline, and 88-page technical document to my professor, as well as explaining the reason I did what I did. He told me that this would be unacceptable in the professional world and would get me fired, but he changed my individual grade to a 93%. Also, I work with one of the girls from my group now, and she's still answering end-user calls all day. I had a math teacher who I didn't like, so I did my homework in the top, tiny square of the paper where the lines met, showing my work and everything just ridiculously tiny. In a choir I directed, we welcomed a new tenor who had a great voice and added perfectly to the ensemble. The tenor next to him, however, was jealous of the new singer's ability and said, "If I had a voice like yours, I wouldn't think to subject others to it in a choir, but would sing solo instead." My brother annoyed me, so I took all of his nice pens out of his backpack and left just one crappy number 3 pencil. I mean, that's a heartbreaking thing to happen in school. I remember the constant, brutal fight to keep one's pencils unstolen and having to steal them myself when the unthinkable happened. You took your brother from wealth to stationary poverty. A child's world turned upside down. I have a child with my ex-girlfriend. Long story, but the short version is I haven't been allowed to see my daughter since she was 3 weeks old, but I pay child support every week. My ex's name is Brittany, and she gets offended when people spell her name Brittany because that's how that skank Britney Spears spells her name. Guess how her child support checks are filled out every single week for the last 13 years. My high school biology teacher would always give us homework sheets to fill in and hand back. I always folded it and put it back in my pocket, and she would always complain to me that my work was too creased. Being the lovely student that I was, I learned origami, and when I next handed in homework, it was in the shape of an X-Wing fighter. Freshman year of college, I had to take one of those Introduction to College courses, aka a waste of time I could be using to actually learn something. The professor was a Jewish lady and mocked our accents. Most of the campus was in-state students from Kentucky. She was a total witch. Towards the end of the semester, we had to write a paper on someone we looked up to for standing by their beliefs. Obligatory leader of the Third Reich paper. I hated that woman and she hated me. Received a 100% on it. I'm not sure which one was more passive-aggressive, my Nazi paper or the actual smiley she put on the paper itself. As someone who is British, this really shocked me. But once I saw a person tut and roll their eyes. Outrageous! Lawyers. What's the stupidest reason you've been asked to sue for? And what was the outcome? I saw photos of a horribly dead couple. They had a son who was an amateur race car driver, and they ignored a fence, several no trespassing signs, and security guards to go stand in a restricted area and film their son's race. A crash happened, they got destroyed, and the son then sued, saying that security shouldn't have physically restricted them from entering that area. I don't know how it ended. I hope it ended with the son getting slapped by the judge, jury, and lawyers. While going through lifeguard training, one of the workers told us a story about why we have to always get consent on children. A lifeguard that he knew had gotten a drowning child out of a pool and saved his life. The mother tried to sue the lifeguard for putting her child on the ground too hard. Luckily, the lifeguard won, but it made me a bit scared to be a lifeguard. I defended a guy who sold his house. He got sued by the buyers. The buyers were told by a neighbor that there was an underground storage tank on the property, and that it had leaked oil. The neighbor was convinced it was there. We went to trial a year later, and the buyer never could produce any evidence of an underground tank or contamination. The jury gave him $13,000 anyway. You're a crappy lawyer? He's either a crappy lawyer or a crappy liar. Either way, something smells about this story. Why the crap would the neighbor say crap like that? Well, I think we've all got a little soiled by these various puns, people. Let's move along, shall we? One of my friends had to defend a government agency from a seemingly serious lawsuit. The issue was about a kindergarten, this is Australia, so it's a preschool age, near a government work site. And the issue was some white trash B-words for kids have breathing issues from dangerous levels of dust. Anyway, my friend isn't high on the ladder, so a lot of the legwork fell to her. She had to go to the suspect site and found it to be a park undergoing massive landscaping. After convincing the bogan that the kids needed a medical examination if they want to pursue the case in a meeting, she notices the mother is a massive chain smoker. This basically led to her correctly guessing that the kids' breathing problems were caused by their mother smoking non-stop all day. Evidence to corroborate it includes the medical examination and 3 incidents where the fire department were called to the bogan's house for fires caused by smoking in bed. In conclusion, mother tries to sue for health issues of children, only to be found as leading cause of said health issues. My childhood friend almost got sued for shooting his friend with an airsoft gun. The pellet hit skin and made the kid go crying to his dad. His dad was some big-shot lawyer and had the kid arrested for being in possession of a firearm or weapon on his property. He later wanted to sue my friend's family to pay for his son's injuries. The injury was a red welt mark, nothing serious. The stupid part was that the lawyer's son invited them over to play with the airsoft guns in the first place. My aunt, Jane, has a medical condition. Without revealing too much, she is an adult but considered a minor because of her dependent status. When she gets sick, she needs to go to the hospital. One day she had an episode and the hospital didn't have enough expertise to handle her case. They said she needed to be taken to the capital city for treatment. Her immediate family were all out of the country, so my grand-aunt, her aunt, hired a service to take her to the capital for treatment. When Aunt Jane's siblings found out about what happened, they decided to sue my grand-aunt for kidnapping. According to them, my grand-aunt had kidnapped Aunt Jane and taken her to the hospital against her will. By the way, my grand-aunt actually got written permission from Aunt A's mother. Now, we live in a third world where bribes sway the hand of justice, so that trial actually lasted a few years. We won in the end, but I get really angry when I think about the lawyers who took their case. My dad, an old ridiculous man, tried to sue McDonald's because he tripped over those stumps in the parking lot. McDonald's. And to make it worse, they were actually really kind to him and got him a first aid kit. Wow, I think this is the first time I've been so ashamed to be related to him, and trust me, there have been a lot of times. Any case where someone's life is saved and they sue the person who saved them. That crap is messed up. That's the main reason why Good Samaritan laws exist. Otherwise, nobody would save anyone else's life due to fear of lawsuit. In some states, the Good Samaritan laws do not really provide much, if any, protection to a would-be rescuer. Good God, is this an American thing? Because that's absurd. I've never heard of anything like that happening over here. A middle-aged woman lost her footing in the parking lot of my significant other's work the other day. At first, she said she was fine, just scraped her knee, etc. But as soon as she sat down, she started coming up with a laundry list of imaginary injuries she had suffered. Oh, she hit her head. And oh, she's feeling nauseous and faint. Oh, and she has a bad hip and shoulder and back. She's in so much pain she can barely move. Significant other called 911 as is protocol. The EMT gave her a clean bill of health and said that there was nothing wrong with her. A skinned knee, sure, but that was it. She refused an offer to go to the hospital, saying she felt better now. Well, 10 minutes later, after the EMTs leave, she and her husband are out taking pictures in the parking lot. She's walking just fine, but guess who's probably going to sue? The sad part is they're going to get a settlement even though it's total BS. It's not worth the time and trouble to let the case go to court, so the lawyers will just throw a few $1,000s her way to get her to go away. Apparently this happens pretty often. People know they'll get paid off, so they turn on the waterworks over even the tiniest injury or slight. Friend had a paternity or child support case walk through his door that was mind-blowing. Couple A and Couple B go out for a night on the town. They're drinking and riding around in a car and decide to get frisky. Only problem? They only have one condom between them. So, being the bright young minds they are, they decide to share the condom. Couple A uses condom first, passes it back to Couple B. Dude in Couple B turns the condom inside out and uses it. Girl in Couple B becomes pregnant with dude from Couple A's kid. Welcome to the South. You can't make this crap up. Dude, Guy B was a frickin' moron for turning the condom inside out. What he should have done was worn it normal, then sued Guy A for making him gay when Guy A's splooge touched his junk. I'm from the South too. I'm not a lawyer, but when I was a kid, our neighbor decided to sue us over 4 inches of land. So on that side of the house, we had a wooden catwalk that led into our backyard. It was in poor condition when we bought the house, so a few years later, my parents decided to hire some contractors to repair it. Within a week of them finishing it, my parents got a letter from a lawyer, which stated that our neighbor was suing them for infringing on his property with this new catwalk. A surveyor was hired and a 3 to 4 year legal battle ensued. The end result? Yes, the catwalk was 4 inches over the property line. However, the old catwalk had been rotting and sloping on that side before the work, so it was probably more than 4 inches over before. My parents had to pay to bring in a new crew and rectify that problem. He built a fence on his front lawn right along the property line, all the way down the road. His wife vanished. We suspect that she left him for being a crazy butthole, and his kids stopped visiting. He moved out about a year after winning the court case. Oh, I almost forgot the best part of the story. He finally decided to settle. He changed the terms of what he wanted to something agreeable because, and I crap you not, the spirits told him it was time. I almost feel bad for the guy because he clearly has some sort of dementia, but he made my parents' lives a living hell for 3 or 4 years. One time when I was 17, I was backing out of my driveway to go to school. There was almost no traffic then because it was before the average Joe left for work in the morning. I checked to see if it was clear, and it appeared that it was. Someone thought that would be a great time to park behind me on the other side of the small road so they could let their kid wait for the bus stop. I just happened to be looking around my opposite shoulder, so I dinged the side of their bumper. They were driving an SUV, didn't want to get insurance involved, and didn't seem to be annoyed, etc. I know, I was a dumb teenager and my dad told me it'd just be cheaper to pay for the damages out of pocket rather than be an unsafe driver for the next 40 years. I ended up paying them like $500 or something since the damage was simply cosmetic. It seemed high in my mind, but that was because I wasn't used to how high car parts can go, like thousands of dollars for a molded plastic kind of thing. Fast forward a few weeks, I'm served with papers to a lawsuit. Apparently the driver and kid are claiming medical damages and many thousands of dollars of damage to their vehicle, including replacing most of the front end. They were asking $500,000 or something. My insurance company said that since I didn't report it, there probably wasn't much they could do, but they'd check. A week after that, an insurance company agent asks me to come in and talk with him, which I do. I'm completely straight with them. They aren't annoyed at all, they just want to get my side of the story and show me the proof the other people had that this story was as they say. First, they had an invoice from a garage that was nearly unreadable. Each line item was for multiple thousands of dollars. Among them, some of the ones we could read were things like replaced engine and repaired/welded frame. Second, the kid had some kind of surgery done between the accident and the lawsuit, which they claim was the direct result of said accident. What was it? The kid developed appendicitis a week or two later. Third, the driver was undergoing treatment at a chiropractor and had a note from them saying they would never be able to lift heavy objects or stand for more than a few minutes at a time, and would probably be in severe pain due to pinched nerves and slipped discs caused by the accident. So I'm sitting there with all these images of being in debt forever running through my head, and the insurance agent is kind of giggling at those things. I was kind of shocked, but they walked me through why each piece of their proof was just an attempt to look serious enough to get a settlement deal on the table. Sure enough, they were suing for $500,000, but willing to settle for $100,000 because the family was so exhausted in dealing with the accident. The insurance company had someone inspect my car, and they were able to say without hesitation that the car had not been through an accident like the kind the people were claiming. They wanted to examine their vehicle too, but apparently said vehicle had been given to relatives out of state because it brought back such bad memories. Also, on a hunch, they looked at the background of the people involved. What do you know? It turns out they just got a big settlement for another serious car accident in another state. A little more digging was done, and the police were notified. I don't know if they ever went to jail for it, but apparently their proof was fake. The kid did get his appendix removed, but their freaking health insurance paid for that. My dad is a lawyer, so I have a couple of these. My dad was once asked to represent a man who tripped on the sidewalk due to a tree. He said he walked that sidewalk every day. The time he walked it and tripped, apparently a tree jumped out in front of his path and tripped him. Second one is a little weirder. A woman called my dad for legal advice because there was a spider in her baby's diaper package. When asked, she said she put that diaper with the spider in it on her baby. She wanted to sue Pampers. My dad hung up on her there. I saved the best for last. My dad represented a taxi driver for when he got into a car crash. Everything went like a normal case. My dad won the case for the driver very quickly. As he was with the guy for payment, he found out that the taxi driver was blind. You heard that right, he was 80% blind in both eyes. No one found out except my dad, not the taxi driver's clients, not the jury, not the judge, not even the DMV. He walked out of my dad's office with one of those tapping sticks and drove home. I mean, that last story isn't so much stupid as outright ridiculous, and for a completely different reason than the others. My goodness. Not a lawyer, but I'm a client manager at a law firm. I once had a man call in trying to sue the local Popeyes because they gave him a large order of wings instead of a small order of thighs. He had witnesses to prove it and everything. So basically, you're the last line of defense between the lawyers and the insanity of the real world. Lady calls 911 and says the dump truck in front of her is spilling gravel all over the road and her truck. I ask her if any damage is done to her vehicle and she says she doesn't know. Officers find the dump truck, follow it about a mile and don't observe any gravel spilling out. They pull it over anyway to get driver, company, insurance information, assuming she wants to make a damage to property report. I ask the lady to stop with the officers or bring her vehicle to the police department so they can see the damage and do the report for her insurance company. She tells me she doesn't have time because her daughter is late for a singing lesson. 2 weeks later, after a hailstorm, she came to the PD to make a report for the damage, but she is driving another vehicle. She claims her truck is already at the repair shop and the estimate is $3,000. Officer tells her he can't make a report for damage without seeing the vehicle, but he goes ahead and makes an information-only report to appease her. Now she's trying to sue the PD because the officers won't testify that the dump truck is the cause of the damage. Kind of like, I'm going to sue you unless you perjure yourself. Good lord. Guy sued the creators of Budweiser because he suffered emotional distress, mental injury, and financial loss because he didn't nail beautiful women like the adverts promised, thus causing him to consume more and more. The judge basically told him to take it like a man like the rest of us borderline alcoholics do. My friend had a client who wanted to sue his parents for emotional abuse. That abuse consisted of giving the client a name he didn't like. It's not even as if the name was one of those ridiculous ones. It was a perfectly ordinary one, if a little uncommon in our country. Needless to say, my friend didn't agree to represent the guy. My fire tech teacher has a great story he told me of. He worked with the fire department, and they're called in to a car accident. The first car is smashed in, and they get the jaws of life. Open it up, one man survived, and his 9-month pregnant wife was decapitated. Another firefighter proceeded to do an emergency C-section and save the man's baby. Well, after finding out he was out of scope for doing so, the man sued the firefighter. He sued him for saving his only child. For those who asked, the guy won the lawsuit. The firefighter lost his license, uncertain if he was jailed, and yeah, so he lost. Worked in law firms for 10 plus years. Heard a great story where a guy comes in with his wife and teen daughter to discuss defense against a claim that the dad fiddles the daughter. The guy basically says, "It's my daughter, I can do what I want with her." The mum says nothing. The lawyer was disbarred for vaulting the table and punching the dad. My sister was sued by this elderly woman. It was her senior year of high school toward the end of the year. She's leaving school and takes a right onto the road. Her and the elderly woman got into a car accident and the police officer found my sister at fault. Within a year later, my parents learn that the old lady is suing them for doctor appointments and such. When it comes to the case, we find that the elderly woman had been taking prescription pills that affect motor skills. Worst case, the pills were in the daughter's name, not hers. Not only that, but the old lady had been speeding in a 35-mile-per-hour school zone. She actually admitted to it. Parents didn't have to pay a dime to the old broad. Not a lawyer, but I did get sued once. For child support. My deadbeat dad ex-husband called after 5 years of no contact and no financial support. He's dying. Kids see him. The younger one wants to stay with him for a while. She stays with him and his new wife and daughter. They live in the same town. He miraculously gets better. 4 months in, I get a letter from his lawyer for child support. Says I'm a deadbeat mum, he's had her for years without any support from me. I walk into the remediation meeting with school and medical records, divorce and support papers, history of his non-payment through the state, and of course, proof of his other daughter who still lived with me. Apparently he forgot to tell his lawyers a few things. Younger daughter is dumped back on my doorstep the next day, and I never hear from his lawyer again. That was over 20 years ago, and he's still alive. A lady tried suing a train company because her husband was killed by one of their trains. Sounds responsible? No. Her husband came to a stop at the crossing, then decided to drive his truck through the barrier and was hit by the train. In the process, parts of this man went flying into Kingdom Come and landed on some lady's windshield. She sued the man's family for damages and because it traumatized her. Oh my gosh. As ridiculous as the first lawsuit in the story is, I can't help but think that suing the man's family for having the nerve to die in a traumatic way and leave his wife alone isn't the most humane course of action. In fact, it may be why the first lady sued in the first place, to maybe recoup some of the losses. I could go on all day, but I'll limit it to the most egregious two. I'm a retired public defender. Before I started with the PD's office, I worked briefly for a private firm where I encountered these two cases. 1. A single-parent mum had to fly out of town for training for her job. Deadbeat dad wasn't paying child support because he claimed he couldn't find a job. This will be important later. Mum left her 4-year-old daughter with her sister, the child's aunt. While mum's away, the aunt takes the girl to Chuck E. Cheese. A repairman at Chuck E. Cheese opens an access panel to repair the pulleys that operated the giant puppets. Repairman goes in back to get a tool and leaves the access panel open. The girl puts her hand in the opening and her fingers are severed. She is rushed to the ER and the docs want a parent. With mum out of town, deadbeat dad is called in. After consulting with the docs and the girl in the OR, deadbeat dad calls the law firm from the waiting room and wants to know if he has a case. He wants to include lost wages as part of his damages. I left for public defender soon after and I don't know how the case ever resolved. 2. A 28-year-old man marries a 16-year-old girl, much to the dismay of her parents. In this state, a 16-year-old can marry without parental consent if she is pregnant, which she was. He proves to be a chronically unemployed and abusive husband. The mother-in-law convinces the girl to take the baby and come home. With her gone, husband of the year goes out and finds a high school girl. The wife changes her mind and returns to her husband with the baby. Months later, husband is served in a paternity suit from the high school girl he was with during the wife's absence. He makes an appointment with me and wants to know if I can force the mother-in-law to pay the child support to high school girl, since it was the mother-in-law's fault that the wife wasn't there for him to have fun times with, therefore forcing him to seek out high school girl. We didn't take the case. Fairly unrelated to the question, but I rarely get to tell this story. I was picking up an old lady, 80-ish, for church one Sunday morning because my parents had asked me to. I was like 17 at the time. The lady doesn't live too far from the church, so I say sure, why not, and proceed to pick her up from her house. I pick her up and take her to church, no problem. I sleep through the service and take her back because that's just what you do for people you give rides to a place. When I got there, she slipped out of my car, Explorer, and fell to the ground and she started wailing that something was broken. So I get an ambulance over there and of course it's her hip. No big deal, happens all the time to old people. They patch her up and I think replace her hip because it was like number 3 for her. And so a few weeks later, I found out that the lady is suing me for her falling out of my car. What the hell? So I bring it up to my insurance company and they actually settled with her for an extraordinary amount of money. $200,000, I believe. What? How is this even a thing? Anyone? $200,000 was probably the cost of her medical bills and she had to sue you to get your auto insurance to cover it. Her health insurance may have refused to pay, and this could have been her only option. The same thing happens when someone injures themselves in your home and can't afford the medical bills. They sue you to get your homeowners/renters insurance to cover it. I'm sure my lawyer thinks it's a bit ridiculous a girl physically attacked me over a $1 burrito while she was blackout drunk and is now trying to press assault and battery against me when all I did was shove her back a few times in self-defense. What's your homeowners association horror story? Well, here it goes. It's not my story, but my dad's. When I was real little, my parents owned a house in Florida that was part of a homeowners association. Behind the house was a lagoon or pond or whatever, and the backyard went right up to it. Basically, the backyard ended at a little slope that went right down into the water. One day, my parents got a notification from the HOA that the grass in the back was unkempt and this was a violation and there would be a fine if he didn't cut it. What they meant was the grass on the slope into the pond needed to be cut, even though that wasn't a part of the property. My dad said whatever, broke out the lawnmower and got to work. Just as he was finishing up, a huge frickin' alligator comes rushing up out of the water. My dad does the only logical thing. He lets go of the lawnmower and runs. The mower runs down the slope, hits the alligator, most likely teeing it off, and sinks halfway into the water. My dad leaves it there because he ain't gonna mess with no scaly death machine. A week or so later, another notice arrives, this time about yard tools being left out, the mower in the pond surrounded by agitated miniature water dragons. And yes, there was a fine. Dad said, screw 'em, and refused to pay a fine or any HOA dues ever again. They added monthly fines for non-payment. Made a point of specifically never paying the HOA every month when he gave the mortgage to the bank. The bank didn't care since they got their money. Who cares about some crappy board? About a year later, when my parents sold the house, the HOA came to collect. Guess what my dad said? That's right, he said, F off. Take my payment out of the lawnmower, if the gator lets you. Then they drove off into the sunset. As far as we know, the lawnmower is still there in the water, guarded by scary dinosaurs. I had just moved into my house a few months prior when I got a letter threatening to be fined $200, stating that my mailbox wasn't black. I thought surely they had the wrong house because my mailbox was in fact black. So I contacted them and they gave a runaround arguing that it wasn't. I told them to come and look and of course they said it was on me to prove to them it was black. So I snapped a photo and emailed it to them. I hear nothing back for well over a month, then get another letter giving me a courtesy week extension before I'm fined. I'm livid at this point, so contact the HOA again asking for an explanation as to what exactly the problem is. I'm finally told that neighbors felt my mailbox was rather worn and needed to be painted or replaced. So basically, it wasn't black enough for them. So I fricking painted it. Now for the part that set me over the edge. After a few months or so, I learned the fricking HOA will replace a mailbox as it's covered under our terms. So I called them asking about why they threatened to fine me when they were the ones that should replace it, if not to standard. They stated it was because they had no open work orders for my mailbox and that it was my responsibility to notify them if it needed maintenance, not theirs. If you fancy being really petty, every week send a request saying that your mailbox is in need of repair. I'm no stranger to these sorts of stories from petty, bored bureaucrats, but do they retire and resolve to do the same thing on HOAs? Because supposedly these associations are run by people weirdly passionate about the neighborhood. This just seems intentionally negligent and crappy. This is actually something that is an ongoing battle between my friend's mum and her HOA, or more specifically, one member. She lives inside this circular complex full of townhouses with a roundabout in the center that used to have a lot of trees and looked really nice, almost like a mini park. The HOA decided to cut down all of the trees without giving notice, and my friend's mum was annoyed. She went to complain about it and they basically said, "Sorry, too late." In protest of them doing that, she decided to buy this big inflatable palm tree that she stuck on her balcony for all to see. Decided to file a complaint because it looked gaudy. She knew exactly who it was, and it upset her more that this person did that instead of coming to talk to her after years of living near each other. She was able to keep her tree, and when Christmas came around, she even decorated it. She decided she was going to wage this war against the HOA, and this neighbor by having annoying inflatable decorations on her balcony. When it started warming up, she bought a flamingo, which she likes to dress in Chicago Cubs or Blackhawks gear, depending on the season. I told my friend he should get her a 6-foot wacky waving inflatable Superman to put on there next, which I think would be hilarious, but I don't know if she wants to take it that far. They towed my car from my driveway. Yes, my driveway. Tags were legit. This was an HOA that had a limited allotment of parking spaces that were nowhere near the actual homes. The homes themselves had mini driveways, so after a really long day there were no parking spaces available, so I temporarily parked in the driveway, went in the house, came back out 30 minutes later to try to find a parking spot, walked outside and thought my car got stolen. Nope, butthole neighbor, probably, plus towing company, plus California. Triple screwed. When we first moved in, I asked the neighbor across the town how serious the HOA was here. He said bad. Then told me a story where he got a notice with a photo of his recycle bin being left in the street for too long. The photo was of him walking the recycling bin back to his garage. Lol. I had the HOA come out to approve a fence I was going to install. The lady at the HOA office was very nice and said my plans were within the covenant bylaws, etc. We just needed to have the inspector check it out himself to sign off. When he gets to my house, he says he doesn't understand what I wanted to do. I explained the type of fence I wanted to install, and he said that wasn't, from his knowledge, allowed. I walked him out to the street and pointed 2 houses down and say, "That house right there has the fence I want to install." He scoffs at this, walks down to look, and sure enough, it was exactly as I described it. He tells me, "Well, we don't like to have a bunch of different types of fences in this neighborhood." I reply, "I don't care what you prefer. The covenant says I can have that fence and that's what I'm going to install because it's within the specifications of the covenant." Old fella didn't have much to say after that. I got a letter the next week with "approved for fence install." What is the universal deal with all these people? Are they just all that bored that they exclusively live for the small moments of competition in their life? Who does this? October 2016, my condo started to collapse. We were forced to leave and officially homeless for a year, with a card from the Red Cross and everything. The HOA did nothing. No one would admit to anything, explain anything, or contact us at all. For a year we waited, when we were finally told the building was structurally sound again, only to be told a week ago that we have to get out and get everything we own out for a month while they do repairs. Sometime this spring. Worst of all, we were required to keep paying our HOA fees through the entire thing. The only way owners were offered non-payment was if we signed a document promising not to sue anyone. Never again with a condo. Never again with an HOA, and never again with River Towers in Alexandria, Virginia. My ex's boyfriend's father was part of the homeowners board for their townhouse community. His wife would walk their dog around the entire neighborhood every day and carry a notebook to write infractions to report back to her husband. Ridiculous stuff. Neighbors have a window AC unit? Reported and fined. Have a garden that's a square foot too big? Reported and fined. Some people have absolutely no lives. Not my story, but my dad's. He moved into a new townhouse in summer of 2013. It was a foreclosure property, as the previous tenants were kicked out for not paying their mortgage and for not paying their HOA dues. They gave everyone in the HOA new patios and decks the summer prior. It was required and you had to get a new deck/patio. But the tenants had to pay for them in monthly installments in the next 3 years along with their HOA dues. As I said, the previous tenants foreclosed on their home. However, there was one rule placed when they got the decks, which was that you couldn't move out without paying off your deck first. He was told by the HOA that he would not have to pay off the deck because it was foreclosed and he was not responsible at all for paying it off. Sweet, free deck. He signed off on that. He moved in, but then he started getting assessments from the HOA for the deck. But wait, he wasn't supposed to be paying for the deck. He fought with the board. Even with the signed thing saying we didn't have to pay for the deck, the board went against him. He ended up having to pay off the remaining balance on the deck. To this day, he refuses to speak about this topic. It's a trigger for him. Most recent one was this year. They sent a letter saying no Christmas decorations until the 1st of December, and they all had to come down before the 3rd of January. They also sent a whole list of forbidden ornaments, including anything inflated or not in keeping with the spirit of the season. So basically all the light-hearted, funny ornaments. Look out the windows, kids. It's the Grinch's sad fricking cave. Anyway, we had beautiful weather on Black Friday, but had to wait until things got cold again before we could get out there and put up lights. Then, after New Year's Day, we had exactly 1 day to take down all our lights, and the wind chill was -25. Naturally, we decided, screw that, there's no way they will bill anyone for this, and opted to just leave the lights unplugged. We got a bill before 10 a.m. on the 3rd. Not a homeowners association, but a neighborhood association, so close enough. 2 quick stories about the same folks. A friend of mine who had a diseased, rotting, falling over tree in his front yard had to request the association's approval to have the tree removed. His request was initially denied and stalled for several weeks because the association wanted professional verification that the tree wasn't actually diseased. A cursory glance at a tree that was practically horizontal in the guy's yard wasn't enough, apparently. The church I'm a member of owns a house next door to the church. The house has some historical significance and is architecturally interesting, but at this point it's been totally abandoned for years. The family who built the house no longer has any interest in it, they sold it to the church and have no relatives in the city anymore. Because of the architecture and the length of the abandonment, doing anything productive with the house is likely a $1 million+ project. But the association has flatly refused to approve any non-reno plans and simultaneously has refused any notion at all to tear the house down. So the church is stuck with a house that is in increasingly bad shape, totally empty, can't be sold because of its condition, and the neighborhood association will not approve any plan to do anything with the house except leave it alone. I'll amend my earlier statements. These people aren't just bored and looking for a fight. They are all these things and also dedicated to avoiding all the actual duties they should be fulfilling in approving helpful work. For a man who has nothing to do with these bodies, they sure get me angry. Not a horror story yet, but it could be. When we moved in, someone stopped by to say hi, but more like to tell us our boat can't be parked on our lot. My wife told her, well, we read all the rules and it doesn't say that. She replied, well, I wrote the rules, so I should know. My wife told her to go read them again. Don't hear anything for months. When we get our annual dues packet, there is a newsletter saying our lot is in violation and that we stated plans to modify our garage to fit the boat in the spring. We never said that. They suggested setting a deadline for us and setting a vote to add boats to the list they already had. Campers, fifth wheels, motorhomes, and travel trailers. Bought the house intending to build a detached garage, but in order to comply with the design rules, it would cost me $90,000. So I'm waiting till I get an official anything in the mail, then I'll get a storage unit. By the way, my neighbor has been here 6 months longer than us and they have a boat in their driveway too. They sent us a series of nasty notices to remove the dead tree in our front yard. The tree had lost all of its leaves and it was unsightly, apparently. The catch is that they sent us this notice in November. You know, like fall, when perfectly healthy trees lose their leaves. We pretended we didn't understand which tree they were talking about until spring, when the tree magically came back to life. We're also going to fine you for leaving all that strange white stuff in your yard in the winter. Mine involves kids, cops, assault, a sex scandal, and the elderly. My very first place in college that I didn't rent was a townhouse condo. Typical cookie-cutter, 3-storied, 4 to a section, little cutout of suburbia for beginners. I lived near the back of the development. This meant driving by or past the front units every day to get to and from work and school. Our HOA board president, Sonia, lived across the street from our HOA treasurer, Zelda. Sonia was in her 30s, ran an illegal daycare out of her home, and I hated driving by her house after 3 p.m. or on weekends because her 2 elementary-aged kids would hide behind parked cars and run in front of your vehicle, screaming, "Slow down!" I got really scared after this happened a few times and only drove 5 miles per hour through there, and the little crapheads kept doing it. I spoke with their mum about how unsafe jumping in front of cars was. I'm only going 5 miles per hour because I'm terrified and they're basically harassing me and our neighbors weekly. Sonia says her kids are being neighborhood monitors and I should be thankful for their diligence. WTF. A week later at 7 p.m., after most of the residents are home, mostly young families, I pull in after working my retail job after class. I notice a tow truck. Then 2, then 3. Holy fricking crap. They're towing everyone in the neighborhood. I park in my garage and run upstairs and tell my roommates to move their cars from the street parking. They run out and sure as crap, everyone who parked on the street is getting towed. There's 2 of my neighbors fighting with the tow drivers that they've always parked there. It's a parking area, it's in our homeowner's booklet. We whip it out and the tow truck drivers say they're just following orders of Sonia and they leave when the police show up. Sonia put up home-printed paper signs and signed a contract with the tow company in the middle of the day without telling anyone. The cops advised all residents that tomorrow this would be effective, but that the homemade signs Sonia made were not legal and there was no posted "no parking" signs. Guys, that night she was out in the street with a red bucket of paint, painting the curb red. She had the tow company post their tow signs and no parking signs the next afternoon. Goodbye street parking. Now anyone who didn't fit in the garage had to park 3 blocks away outside the condo units. The next straw was when one day 4 large evergreen trees were cut down from a communal park in the development. Old lady and treasurer Zelda found out Sonia had paid her sideman, who was also an arborist, over $8,000 of HOA money to cut these trees down, without any discussion or approval from the HOA board. Zelda flipped out, and the next HOA meeting let everyone know what happened to the trees and how Sonia screwed our HOA money away. We were planning for a community co-op garden. After the 6 o'clock meeting, I guess someone else on the board called Sonia to let her know that she was going to be removed from the HOA president seat due to the unapproved expenses, towing issue, and more. Well, at about 8 p.m., I hear screaming. Like blood-curdling screams from a woman. "Help! Call the police!" People, it's Zelda. She's outside her condo, fricking screaming. Sonia came over, punched the 70-year-old Zelda in the face, pulled her out of her own home, locked her out, and was now threatening to harm Zelda's disabled and bedridden elderly husband, who was upstairs. Zelda's fricking hysterical. I'm on the phone with the police, and about 5 neighbors are also outside on the phone with the police. Zelda's screaming every curse word in the book through her own front door at our crazy ex-HOA president. Sonia was arrested that night for crazy crap like assault and holding someone hostage. Since Sonia was a single parent, her kids were taken away by relatives about an hour after CPS showed up. Zelda had this gnarly black eye and huge scratches on her chest, where I guess Sonia clawed through her shirt and pulled her into the haymaker. I only lived there 14 months and moved due to the escalating issues with the HOA. Wait, so things continued to escalate after this? What happened? Were the members threatening to nuke each other? When I was a kid, I lived in one of the 2 front rooms of the house, which were the hottest in the summer and the coldest in the winter. My dad didn't like to use the AC, so we all just had fans. One summer, it got so unbearably hot in my room that fans just weren't cutting it, and I was miserable. My dad then put an AC unit in my window, and it was awesome. But it was short-lived because the HOA told us to take it down because it was an eyesore. My parents told them it was for their child, but they didn't care, so my parents had to take it down. The kicker is that just down the street, a guy who had the exact same model house as us had an AC unit installed in the exact same window as the one we had it in, and the HOA never said a word to him. Didn't happen to me personally, but I guess I can tell you about my parents' experience with their HOA. Dad retired and decided that he really wanted to buy a camper and travel. Mum was all about it, both of them very excited. So Dad runs off and trades his F-150 truck for an F-250 with a big diesel V8, buys a gooseneck camper and waits for spring. Camper in the backyard, truck in the garage, no big deal. Not long after, he gets a visit from a lady. She's got a list of rules from the HOA that was established long after my parents had built their house, something like 15 years later when the subdivision really took off, saying that Dad couldn't have the camper on his property because it was an eyesore. Mind you, this camper is in the backyard between a 6-foot privacy fence. You could still see it, sure, but it's not like it was old and in disrepair either. So here's my retired parents living in a subdivision that has an HOA that was established long after they built their home, and the HOA is expecting them to abide by rules they didn't agree to. He never moved the camper. Not mine, but one of my good friends has a rather insane HOA. They actually used rented surveying equipment to determine that his clothesline was 1 inch taller than his fence, and fined him several $100s for some stupid structure beyond the fence rule they had. Same HOA had someone walking around actually measuring the length of the grass with a ruler and issuing warnings for mowing. We live in an HOA neighborhood and had a neighbor trying to sell his house a few years ago. I kept my trash cans by my garage. They aren't ratty looking or stinky, they looked brand new, and noticed when I'd come home, they were gone. After looking, I find them behind my fence in my lawn. This happened 3 times in a week, so after that I got annoyed and thought someone was screwing with me. I go to the hardware store and got the largest chain and padlock I could find and start chaining them to the post on my front porch. My neighbor is outside and I say, "Hey Craig, you wouldn't happen to know what keeps happening to my trash cans?" Apparently he scoured the HOA rulebook and found out they are required to be out of sight except on trash day. He thought my trash cans being visible is why he was having a hard time selling his insanely overpriced house in a crap market and was moving them himself. Never talked to me, never got a notice from the HOA. I yelled at him for a while and told him he's a fricking child and he should know better than to repeatedly come onto my property and screw with my stuff without my knowledge at over 40 years old. Trash cans or not, it's my stuff, my property, land, fence, and lawn. Everyone in our neighborhood receives fines for leaving garbage cans at the road. It was trash day. But you didn't put it out 90 seconds before the truck arrived and remove it 13.6 seconds after. Shame on you. Well, if you're as aggravated as I am, let's end on the high note of the story of triumph over the formation of one of these monstrous organizations. So it was a new community and my family just bought a house. So once all the other houses got built, this lady says she's going to start the HOA as per our agreement in the contract. So they call for a block party, no one shows up. A month later, another gathering at their home. No one shows up. 6 months pass by, call for a meet and greet at the community mailboxes. No one shows up. 2 months later, we get a letter asking for dues. Us and our neighbors next door and across the street talk about no one paying, and we spread the word to our 30 other neighbors and the HOA died. Haven't heard from them in a few years. When did doing the right thing horribly backfire? I was in an extremely weird and once-in-a-lifetime kind of car accident, where I was supposed to be not at fault. I really don't want to go into detail, but another car hit me going twice the speed limit, sending both of us rolling down into a ditch. I got out through the windshield since it was shattered and was able to cut the airbag. The other car was in much worse shape and was on fire. I ran up to see if the driver was okay, but she was falling in and out of consciousness. Her car was upside down and roof was caving in, pressing her into her seat. The seatbelt was tight around her and her airbag wasn't deflating. I struggled with the door and was able to get her out as the fire spread to her. I remember passing out a little after I was able to put out the fire on her legs. Woke up in the ambulance, broken leg and concussion. EMTs said I was only able to save her from all the adrenaline coursing through my system. The police that wrote the report found her at fault and said I was a hero, but no good deed goes unpunished. She had first-degree burns on her legs and face and had super cheap-ass insurance. She ended up suing me and dragging me into a 4-year legal process that not only cost my insurance thousands, but had me spending money on legal fees and lost wages from constantly having to go to court. It was finally settled because somehow all she needed to prove was that I was at least 1% at fault and my insurance folded. She was awarded my full liability, $200,000, plus $25,000 that I'm on the hook for personally. I was able to get my car paid off and whatever was left in my pocket for a new car had to go to her. It's been 6 years since the accident and I still owe about $12,000, but I'm trying to avoid paying that. The last time I talked to my attorney after she was awarded damages, he said something that I'll always think back on and wish I could have changed my actions. He said if he was in my shoes and knew the outcome, he would have left her there to burn. At least you know when you're in a situation where you have no time to think, just react, you do the right thing and fight for the stranger's life. People like you reinvigorate my goodwill towards others. Sure, it ended poorly, but no matter how cynical that woman's actions may make us, you are the saving grace that keeps us inspired and willing to bear ourselves. What? I literally cannot comprehend why so many stories on this thread involve people suing their saviors. Human greed knows no bounds. It makes me want to live alone in the wilderness. In one of my previous scripts on lawsuits, there is a trend of this happening in America. Sadly, it seems that when people do get into life-altering situations, the only way they can recoup their losses is by suing anyone they can who was even tangentially involved. It's awful, but it's true for that country. I was in the parking lot of a store one time when a lady dropped a bunch of stuff off her cart. She was having trouble picking up the box of bulk items. I told her that I would help her and we both picked the box up and put it in the trunk of her car. She then sprayed me with pepper spray and screamed. I was left confused as to why I was attacked as she almost ran me over driving out of there. I was at a club and saw my friend's girlfriend sitting in a booth, not looking so great. I decided to go over to help her. I told my friend he should probably take her home and helped her to start walking outside. She then threw up all over my sports jacket. At that point, I had vomit all over me and the bouncer wanted her gone ASAP, so I had to leave the club in a hurry. In all the excitement, I forgot that I had left my tab open, which at this club required both your driver's license and credit card. By the time I realized this, I was 25 miles away, with no hope of going back. I called another of my friends who was still there to close it for me. He called back to say that they didn't have my ID or credit card, but that the bartender had given him someone else's ID instead. He was pretty drunk, so I wasn't sure what was going on. I later called the club about 20 times and went back there, but no ID or credit card. I saw a woman litter right next to a trash can, and I was walking behind her. As I thought I was out of her peripherals, I picked up the trash and threw it away. She apparently saw me and for some unknown reason became belligerent as if I had just insulted her. She then proceeded to try and hand me more trash whilst exclaiming fairly irately that if litter bothered me so much I should throw it all away. One of the weirdest encounters in my life. So here is my story. It was Christmas Eve night a few years back in Kansas City, Missouri. There was a considerable snowfall and the city was having one of our worst winters in years. I was leaving my girl's house around 11 p.m., who lived about 8 minutes away from where I stayed. Normally, this would be a quick zip down Blue Park and I would be home, but there was already about 2.5 inches of snow, and my car was a beater, but I was managing. As I'm heading down the road, I see a guy and his kid, I crap you not, without a coat, standing in front of a car in a liquor store parking lot. Now, I could give two craps, honestly. If an adult got himself in trouble normally, I would keep going. But I honestly felt bad for the kid, and he had to be cold with no coat and all. So anyhow, I pull up and ask him if he needs a jump. "Nah, dog, I got a bad starter. It screws up when it's cold," the man replies. After I figure out it's nothing I can help with, I ask if he would like me to call someone. "Nah, homie, but if you could give me a ride to my house, that'd be cool as hell." His street was about 3 streets back down the road, so I figure no big deal. Him and his kid huddle in the car. At this point, I notice the man reeks of marijuana and is probably high. Now, the important thing to remember in this story is that the main street I was on was an emergency snow route, meaning it had been pre-treated and the plows had already run through it. This, of course, makes the snow at the entrances to side streets higher and a bit more packed, a fact I hadn't really considered until I turned into his street and I got my front 2 tires stuck completely in snow. When it was clear I was stuck and couldn't go forwards or backwards, the man said, "Ah, crap, my bad, man. My house is pretty close from here. Good looking out, though," and then proceeded to get out of my car and walk to his front door. A front door I could see from my car that was stuck. He did not offer to help me get my car unstuck, not that we could with the 2 of us, nor did he offer to let me come in and wait for a tow truck. I ended up spending Christmas morning that year hanging out at a 7-Eleven for about 6.5 hours waiting on a tow truck. A friend of mine was walking down the street late at night when he saw a man lying in an alleyway. The guy looked as though he'd been hurt really bad and was asking for help. My friend approached him to find out how badly he had been hurt and what he needed to do. When he did, a bunch of guys ambushed him, beat the crap out of him, and stole all his money. The whole thing had been a setup just to lure him into a vulnerable situation. It's freaking terrible to take advantage of someone else's kindness like that. I read a story of a man driving in the middle of the night on a street surrounded by cornfields when he saw a man laying in the street ahead, not moving. He contemplated helping, but ultimately decided he should find help ahead to play it safe. He carefully drove around the body and slowly drove off, and when he looked in his rear mirror, he saw the body stand up and slink away into the cornfields. Most likely, there was an ambush waiting. It's truly sad that the moral of a lot of these seems to be, don't help people who look like they're in need. I would hope that we can refine it to assess the situation, but I guess we know that isn't always possible in the heat of the moment. Gave a one-eyed homeless guy $5. He wandered off, apparently telling other homeless guys his good fortune. Homeless guys began melting out of the scenery, asking for their $5. I realized my mistake at that point and stopped being generous. They apparently turned their anger on One Eye and stabbed him for his $5. I found out when questioned by police. Reminds me of an incident in high school. We used to drive down to a liquor store in Newark, New Jersey, to buy beer. There was always a crowd of homeless outside, and you'd frequently get back to your car to find a bum going through your ashtray for change and such. Anyway, the biggest of the homeless guys was Daryl. For the price of 1 beer, Daryl would watch your car and even escort you back to make sure no one hassled you. Well, one time, a buddy feels bad for Daryl and throws him $5. That was it. The price of going for beer went from 1 Meisterbrow, $5 per 12-pack, to $5. Being that a 12-pack and a pack of smokes totaled $7.50, this was an unacceptable tax. A new, disreputable liquor store had to be located. I was walking to the garage through the main lobby of the hospital I work at, I'm a nurse, and saw a woman sprawled across the floor with her family around her. I ran over to help and asked, "Are you okay?" Good lord. This woman sits straight up and starts screaming.
Did she just ask if I'm okay? Did she just ask me if I'm okay?
and proceeds to throw punches at me. They all missed even though I was in WTF mode. Apparently she just found out a family member passed away and had fallen to the ground from shock. I had two good friends who dated for a very long time and fought like miserable spouses. We all know that couple. So they finally break up and the dude has to move out. I didn't want to get involved in their messy breakup, so I declined him when he asked to stay with me. Fast forward a few days and he gets kicked out of his friend's house, who lives with his mum, and can't go home to his parents because of his new job. So I begrudgingly say yes because I know I would hope for the same generosity in that position. A few weeks go by with no drama, and then I have to go out of town for 2 weeks. I'm glad to have someone watch the apartment. My landlord calls me a few days later saying my shower leaked and flooded the downstairs apartment, causing over $2,000 in damage to both my apartment and the downstairs one. My friend denies the whole thing, will not admit he did anything wrong, and also refuses to help me pay for it. I got kicked out, never got my security, and had to pay an additional $1,000 because of a clause in the lease saying it was my responsibility to maintain all plumbing. I let another driver get in front of me in the fast lane when I could have sped up and blocked him. He sped up to about 80 miles per hour, and a half-mile down the road from me, he rear-ended a car that blew a tire and wrecked. I did not check the news to see if anyone had died, and never will. A lawyer friend of mine represented a guy pulled over for speeding or something, who was asked by the officer, "Do you have any firearms?" The man responds honestly, "Well, I have one locked up at home, but not on me." Turns out, since the time he legally purchased and registered his firearm, Congress had passed a law making it a federal felony for anyone ever convicted of domestic assault to own or possess a firearm. Problem is, even though the Commonwealth had a list of people convicted of domestic assault and a list of people with registered firearms, nobody let our guy know that when he answered this question a bit too honestly, he was confessing to a federal felony with a minimum sentence of 5 years in the pen. My laptop had just died when I found a MacBook Pro at a park with no one around to claim it. I hung around the laptop for half an hour and no one came forward. I tried to find the owner, but it was password protected and I didn't want to mess with it. My wife, being the ethical angel on my shoulder, convinced me to turn it in with the caveat that I could keep it if no one claimed it. I took it to the police station. Before I handed it over, I asked about their found property policy, and the desk person said, 90 days, and if it isn't claimed, it's yours. Sweet, I might get a free laptop without the guilt of stealing it from someone. So I went to my car and got the laptop and turned it in. The detective saw the laptop and said, "Oh, not computers. We destroy those after 90 days. Gosh darn it. Haha, well, I do understand the policy for the sake of protecting the data and info of the owners, but still a major bummer. I walked out of a bar and saw a man and woman assaulting a homeless man. The homeless guy was about 5'4" and about 110 pounds, and he was already down on his knees. The man and woman were both Samoan from their looks, so they were big. Very big. She was about 6'1" and about 220 pounds, and her male companion was really, really big, about 6'5" and over 300 pounds. I ran up to them and told them to stop, which was a really big mistake on my part. I should have just yelled police or something to get them to stop, but hindsight is 20/20. The woman came after me and her friend tried to flank me, which is super dangerous for me at this point. I'm 5'10" and 200 pounds and can handle myself, but this is quickly becoming something I cannot handle. I pulled my knife before she could get to me, and her friend could get behind me. Her big companion saw that I was not fricking around now, and that I will not go down without a serious fight. As a side note here to anyone who is assaulted, never go down in a street fight. You're defenseless and can easily be very, very hurt, crippled, or killed. Real life is not the movies, and people do not stop beating you because you're defenseless. On with the story. The big Samoan guy grabbed her and held her and said that I had a knife and to let me leave, and I do. I walk/jog the hell out of there, and I'm about a block away when I hear a loud yell. As I spin around, I see the woman running full speed at me, and I have just enough time to get my hands up and spin her into the street, and her boyfriend about 50 yards behind her at full run towards me also. She starts swinging at me hard, not like some dainty girl, but really trying to knock me out. Remember, she outweighs me by 20 pounds, and I have her huge guy friend now barreling down on me from behind. I decide to knock her out, and I unload everything I have into her jaw. She goes down instantly and is out cold. I turn to face her boyfriend, who is now about 10 yards away, and I see him just stop cold and look at her laying in the street. He just walks past me and picks up her head and looks at me. At this very moment, some guys who saw me basically just knock some girl out without any context yell something and start running toward me. They're about a block away. The big Samoan guy looks at me with a really sad expression like he's really sorry for everything and just says, "Run." And I do. I fricking run like someone is trying to kill me because those guys who saw me hit her are fricking coming to kick my butt, and there are a bunch of them. I run to my car and I get the heck out of there. I get away, and I have never told a single person about this incident until right now. I have never been so scared as I was that night. My best friend was going through a messy breakup with his girlfriend. She was teed off, so she stole a whole bunch of his clothes and his cat and drove off to her apartment. We jumped in my car and gave chase. She pulled into her apartment complex and parked before realizing we were behind her, so I pulled up behind her and blocked her car in. She started screaming at me to move my car, and I said, "Frick no," while my friend called the cops. He had had the cat for 8 years and was desperately attached to it. He had only had the girlfriend for 2 years. The cops get there and they talk to everyone. They figure out the situation, they tell the girlfriend to return the cat and the clothes. Then an officer comes over to me and says he's considering arresting me for false imprisonment. My fricking jaw dropped. Normally I'm super respectful and cool with the cops, but it was just too much for me to swallow. Are you kidding me right now? Not at all. You put your car behind hers, making it impossible for her to leave. You kept her there against her will, and that's a crime. She could have gotten out of the car and walked away at any time. I was only stopping her from fleeing the scene with stolen property. Oh, are you a police officer now? Is that your job? I stare at him sullenly, a look of, "You can't be frickin' serious," on my face. I guess we don't do anything at this time, but next time you shouldn't get involved in disputes like this. It's a matter for the police, and you should leave it up to us. God, what a fricking mess that night was. I offered my seat to an elderly lady in the bus. Turns out she wasn't that old and felt offended, so she screamed at me. At which point you tell her to F off and say, "Fine, I guess you don't deserve any courtesy," and proceed to sit back down. Almost the same thing happened to me. Old lady didn't scream at me, but she said in a very catty tone, "Don't think you're doing anything special." But she did sit down in my place. I have fallen prey for this one before. Folks, you should still do it anyway. Just brush off the annoying prideful ones who scream at you for trying to be decent. Or, as another commenter puts it, kick her in the shins. Old ladies have weak bones. When I was young, I was able to save money very well. No bank or anything, just a wooden box under my bed that used to hold dominoes. Every week I would cash my paycheck, put the vast majority in the box, and keep a little pocket money for myself. When I was 18, I worked at a video store. Everyone who worked there were very good friends. One day, we were told by our boss, a really great guy named Drew, that he had come down with stomach cancer. I talked to him afterwards and was sad to hear that the store's terrible insurance was causing Drew to have to choose between treatments or paying his rent. Drew was gay and his family had disowned him, so he had no help. I thought about it for a few days and decided I would help him out. I agreed to loan him money so that he could pay his rent. He would pay me back when able and everything would be great. I gave him $3,000 I had saved since I was 12. A little over 3 actually, but who's counting, right? Cut to 5 months later, I come to work to see Drew being dragged out by police. Turns out he had a massive white powder problem and had been stealing from the store. He was such a good guy, I actually fought for him at work for a month or so until I saw the evidence. I also learned that he had never had cancer. It was a scam that he had used on several friends of his, so he and his boyfriend could get high. I've never been able to get back to where I was financially. I'm not sure what changed. Maybe because I got a bank account. Maybe emotionally it messed me up. I'm not sure. I have $60 to my name now. One thing is for sure, I have never trusted people the same since. Not sure anything will be able to give me that back. In the 7th grade, gave a choking girl the Heimlich maneuver, saved her life. No one else knew how, and was suspended for 5 days for sexual harassment. Her parents tried to sue, but it went nowhere. You've got to be kidding me. Weren't there any faculty present that saw it? Or was it the girl who claimed harassment? The security said I was rubbing myself on her or something. The girl was thankful, her parents were the really upset ones. The school blew it out of proportion. A work friend of mine was going through a nasty divorce. Even though it wasn't finalized, he was seeing another woman at work on the down low, but everyone at the office had suspicions. Having dealt with divorce before, I sent him an email explaining that people were talking and he may want to be more discreet so as to not exacerbate things with his divorce. He told the down low girl what I had said. She told me to mind my business. I explained over and over again that I meant well and it was nothing against her. She convinced him not to talk to me anymore and we haven't spoken since. My wife and I were flying from Montreal to Vienna 2 years ago. We were flying coach, so of course we're the last aboard. I see a lady sleeping in the waiting room at the gate. Good Samaritan that I like to think I am, I gently wake her and ask if she's going to Vienna. She says that, yes, she is, so I tell her that it's final boarding. Away we go, and she gets on behind us. As we're taking our seats, she goes by us and we smell the alcohol vapors. Oh no. Anyway, we get our seatbelts on and they start pushing the plane out to the taxiway. The flight attendants go through the cabin, checking seatbelts. But when they get to the drunk lady, they can't wake her up. So, overcome all the flight attendants, shaking her, trying to wake her up. Finally, they start calling for a doctor on the flight. Someone speaks up and is a nurse. They try and fail. So, back the plane goes to the gate, on come the EMS and haul her out. 2 hours later, we're sitting at the gate while they try to find her luggage to pull off the flight. I sank deep into my seat and hoped like heck no one saw me wake her up to get on the flight. My friends in college had to kill and dissect mice. There were way too many etherized mice for the class, so they got the leftover little dude and carefully revived him, gave him water, stroked his fur, and took him outside and released him on the lawn outside the cafeteria. Free crumbs for life. He made it several yards before a bird swooped down and grabbed him. I saved a bird that was stuck in a fence. It was a wooden privacy fence, and the bird had managed to get its head stuck in between 2 boards on the fence. All I had to do was grab the bird and lift it up above the boards. Anyway, it pooped on me. Office workers. What's your best office story? Used to work with a fairly large woman. Every winter she would catch a cold and hack and cough and just have a rough go of it. She would have these horrible coughing fits to the point where we thought she might pass out. One day she had a horrible coughing fit and peed herself. That night the carpet cleaners came in, pushed all of the office chairs into a back room and shampooed the rugs. Everyone came in the next day to find their chairs in a room and no one knew which chair was which. Everyone spent the day standing or sniffing their chair to see if they had the pee chair. The big lady was actually pretty dang nice and she went on to lose a bunch of weight, ditch her loser husband, and have a great life. So there's a happy ending there. Came into work, I was the early manager, and before I get to my desk, my phone is ringing. Answer it and it's an employee. All he says is, "I have to go, I'm bleeding from my butt." Stunned, I say, yeah, you should leave. I walk to his cube and find a blood-soaked chair with bloody napkins all over it. I ask if he wants to call 911 or something, and he says, "No, I'm driving myself." I call maintenance and I have to explain to them and upper management how all this blood appeared. Guy ended up okay and came back to work a couple of days later. Never asked what the heck the issue was. That's a bleeding hemorrhoid. Not that you really probably wanted to know. The chair was soaked. It was a lot of blood. I asked if everything was good after the fact, and he said it was, and nothing to worry about for other people. I speak from experience. Not quite that bad, but it lasted for days and bled clear through my pants and left a large stain on my seat at its worst. Went to the ER. The doctor acted like I was a big wimp and wasting his time. He then forces a golf ball-sized blood clot out of my butt. So pretty much not a big deal and nothing a person would ever want to discuss with another living soul. I work in a public library, which combines all the joy of customer service and office work. Usually it's just people calling to get phone numbers verified, but there's a few who call for life advice, including, "How many calories are in rye bread versus whole bread? Do I need to water my cactus today? I updated Firefox and now I don't like it. How do I go back to the old version? What day this weekend will traffic be bad?" Personal all-time favorite caller goes to the woman who called to ask me what fellatio technique geishas performed. I guess there is a tendency to automatically think that librarians must read a lot and therefore know more. As far as I know, that particular job is about storage and data entry, but this sure is a funny assumption. I work at a factory back office, watching over incoming and outgoing materials, and general material management. We had a shipping container come in from the States, transporting several big bags of sugar and milk powder mixture. We crack open the container, and much to our surprise, we find a cat. Bear in mind, this container spent a solid week or 2 at sea. The cat was alive. Apparently, it survived by eating the powder. So I did the old screenshot the desktop, hide desktop icons, and save the screenshot as the new desktop background. To 3 different computers, 2 of which were shared between 5 to 10 people. Now the problem was, I called in sick with food poisoning the next day. Utter chaos broke out. No one could open any programs. IT had to get involved, and it apparently took them a few hours to figure out what had happened. No one ever knew it was me, and I had planned on, taking the credit and winning that stage of the prank war. But no, I played dumb and bit my tongue. My current office building was once a funeral home that had sat vacant for a number of years after the previous owner shot himself in the apartment upstairs. When we first moved into the office, there was a wall panel that was accidentally knocked out in the basement. There were about 30 people worth of ashes hidden in the wall. I have one. We have an agent. Let's call him Joe. Joe is about 60 and the perfect employee. Never misses work, perfect stats, honest, customers love him and always give him praise. Volunteers for overtime and absolutely everybody loves him. I use his calls as examples in my training class. He's been offered numerous management positions, but he's perfectly content sitting at home, fixing customers' problems, making them happy, and making our company money. He is an absolute machine. 2 years ago, his wife and his 40th wedding anniversary was coming up, and I had a business trip to Ohio for a new system training. Joe was told that he had to come with me to learn. He pleaded that he couldn't because he would miss his wedding anniversary. Plus it was odd because agents never go on trips, and my manager said sternly, "Do it, Joe. You don't have a choice." Joe of course went home and packed up and got ready to leave a few days later. His wife said she was going to stay with her sisters while he was gone and left the night before. Our company car picked me up from the airport and we headed to Joe's. He was pretty upset and depressed but tried to be upbeat. We went to dinner and stalled for a few hours, for good reason, and when we got to the airport we boarded our plane and headed to Houston for a switch. We got to Houston and we walked up to the Miami gate and I said, "There's your plane." He looked up and I pointed over to his wife standing at the gate. My boss had arranged to send them to Miami for a week and then on a cruise to Jamaica for their anniversary with my boss's company credit card for expenses. The first thing out of his mouth was, "Oh my God, I didn't pack for that." But of course we had his wife take care of that when we sent her out on an earlier flight. He started crying right there in the airport and hugged me. I handed him the credit card and went over to his wife, gave her a hug and told her she owed me some apple cookies. So bomb. And headed to my plane for Ohio. Went to Ohio and... yeah, Ohio. We had a Phil Collins day to screw with a co-worker who professed to hating Genesis. Months after revealing their hatred, the president of the company had the IT company stay after everyone left to absolutely cover this person in Phil Collins's face, and I heart Phil signs in celebration of Phil Collins's birthday. It was practically a holiday and very little work was accomplished as a result. Pretty much the best day at the office ever. I love this because of everyone getting involved and because of my not-so-secret appreciation for Phil Collins. Sounds like a fun place to work. Will this be an annual event? I think my favorite part of this is the casual disregard for the IT department and the rest of the office, making them their own prank monkeys. A guy at my office had a fishing rod along the ceiling. He had the hook positioned over a man's head. We'll call the man Dave. Every so often he dropped the hook, which has a little weight, onto Dave's head and then quickly pulled the cord so the hook is back up to the ceiling and isn't visible. This is going on months and the guy who was being pranked didn't have a clue. He went to the doctor for tests because it felt like a throb to his head, so he worried something was really wrong. When we told him what was happening, he couldn't stop laughing at himself. Dave's revenge was pretty sweet. He did the deed with the prankster's sister. "Oh, I really thought there was something wrong with me. I guess you learn something new about yourself every day. You got me, guys. I'm going to penetrate your sister." OP thought the question said, "Best orifice story." I got this job a few years back. In the first week, I was blown away at the technical ineptitude of the whole darn place. Our job requires a lot of scanning, usually large stacks of bank statements, 100 to 200 pages at a time. And the people who I worked with and for, more often than not, needed to scan things that were front to back. How they did this blows my mind to this day. Step 1. Flip the whole stack upside down so the reverse side was ready to scan. Step 2. Make a copy of every back side. Step 3. Take the reverse side and place it just behind its front side so that it would be page 1, copy of page 2, page 3, copy of page 4, etc. Step 4. Scan the whole stack face up. The amount of paper they wasted was unbelievable. That's the day I became a genius by showing them our enterprise-level scanner could scan front and back simultaneously with the push of 2 buttons. This is also when I became partly responsible for every IT issue in the office, despite having IT members on staff at all times. 10 minutes into the company meeting, someone's phone went off playing bagpipe music. But as it got louder, we realized it was an actual set of bagpipes playing outside. Before we knew it, the guy marches into the conference room, blasting away that one Scottish song. I don't know what it's called, but you know the one I mean. After he finished playing, the speaker, who had been playing dumb until now, announced that we had just acquired a small company in Scotland. Best announcement ever. I worked with a guy we called Irish Jeff. We were on the sales team and he will call customers and start singing "Oh Danny Boy" until the phone rings. When the customer answers and asks if he was singing, he will say, "Well, I am Irish." He will then talk to them for 45 minutes about his Irish heritage and the names of the boats that originally brought people over from Ireland, without letting them off the phone. He doesn't really ever talk about anything he's supposed to be selling. He was born and raised in Texas. We call them plastic paddies in Ireland. They annoy us as much as they annoy you. This was at my last job, a call center on National Donut Day at Krispy Kreme. Girl A had gotten a box of donuts and was on a call with a customer. Girl B comes up and takes one out of the box. Girl A mutes her phone and says, "B-word, you had better be joking. Don't touch my donuts." Girl B turns around and walks away with the donut. Girl A hangs up on her customer and full-on assaults Girl B. An epic brawl breaks out right in the middle of the call floor, and they even crash through the giant partition that separates our call center from another company's, which is actually all in the same giant room. At some point, a knife tumbles out of one of their purses. No one actually pulled it out or tried to use it, but it did fall out. Management has everyone end their calls and clear the floors out. Cops are called and both girls are escorted out, never to be seen there again. Because donuts. I swear to God this is true. I worked in a staffing company as a recruiter. One of the sales guys always bragged about his martial arts skills. One afternoon, one of the female recruiters called bullcrap on him. They were right outside my cubicle. He says something to the effect of, "Oh, don't believe me? I will kick my foot right over your head right now. Stand here, just like this." He positions her and then he gets in a karate squat, I don't know how else to describe that pose, and goes for it without any stretching, practice, or anything. He rotates and kicks his foot way up, just high enough to make solid contact with her right temple with a solid thud. She staggers a bit dazed and he runs and hides in his cube. I couldn't believe what I just saw. It happened so quick. It was insane. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure if the individual is Michael Scott for the audacity and irresponsibility or Dwight Schrute for the martial arts. Maybe some kind of freak hybrid. We call her the Runner. Call center rep was going to be fired for refunding fees that had never been charged. She was essentially just giving away money because she couldn't figure anything out. About halfway to the conference room, she figures out what's happening. As such, she comes to a dead stop and refuses to keep going. She keeps asking her manager, "Johnny, are you going to fire me?" Of course he can't confirm since he's still in the middle of the floor, so he tells her he just wants to be able to have a conversation in private. She keeps asking and he keeps not answering. Eventually, she just turns around and takes off for her desk. Johnny is standing there for about 10 minutes trying to decide between going after her or continuing to the conference room where his boss is waiting for them. He finally decides on the conference room. Johnny is a pretty large guy and his boss is a chain smoker. After the boss knows what happened, they take off running over to her desk and the other rep tells them that she left. They then sprint down into the parking lot. Just as they get to the doors, they see her car pulling onto the street. They hung out for about 5 minutes to catch their breath. When they got back, Johnny called corporate HR, and they let him know that the rep had already called Aetna to file for a leave of absence. She got fired anyway. A girl I worked with, married, was screwing the boss, also married. They stayed after hours for weeks to do their thing in his office. For some reason, she opened up to me about this, even though we weren't friends, and she included the fact that he prematurely arrives all the time. So anytime he's being a butthole, I just picture that and I feel better. This morning, I found a bloody glove in my desk drawer, and Jim Halpert tried to convince me I committed murder. I think he may be the real murderer. My coworker was out of town for an office pancake breakfast. In her absence, we decided to make her a breakfast plate. We ended up making a Vitruvian man made of sausages on a Royal Chenet plate and hiding it in her office. She found it, and then the Vitruvian man began to travel office to office. It was sealed with tape, but that didn't stop it from starting to go moldy. The Vitruvian man was hidden in desk drawers, under paper piles, behind coats. I knew it was my turn for the Vitruvian man to end up on my office, but when I got in, I couldn't find it anywhere. Later in the day, one of our VPs came in to meet me with a serious matter. He asks me a question, and I'm thinking of my response. I look up. There on the ceiling, Mission Impossible style, is a moldy man made of sausages with its taped-on smiley face looking down at me. I awkwardly carried on the conversation with the VP through random laughter which didn't make sense to him. I had to throw out the plate after that. In total, we had it moving around the office for about a month. We've had a couple of good prank wars over the years. Best thing that comes to mind quickly is when we changed a guy's phone autocorrect to replace the full stop with a question mark. He was very confused for days. I also tied all the cables of a guy's computer together under his desk with a zap strap. Monitors, mouse, keyboard, phone, etc. I then hooked that bundle of cables to the lever under his chair that controlled the up-down position and turned the chair so that it was at its 90-degree angle. He came to his desk after lunch and sat down, grabbed a hold of his desk like he normally does to turn his chair, and spun to face his computer. The entire desk was pulled into the rear corner of his cubicle. It made a lot of noise, but not as much as he did swearing. I changed the guy's autocorrect to change the to the fricking. He could not type, so he was always looking down at his keys and depending on words to catch any mistakes. Needless to say, he turned in documentation like, I called the fricking customer and they told me that the fricking software was not functioning correctly. Clearly, I've switched the word fricking for the actual word that this particular prankster used. Here are some more office pranks. I changed people's autocorrect to say, I'm pooping instead of hey. Another one, change work to the brothel. And the best, change beer to fun butt stuff. I'm pooping. Super busy day at the brothel today. In desperate need of fun butt stuff. I did this to my business partner's computer as a joke and went on holiday. He never proofreads anything, so when I got back, I walked into a massive crap storm. He still thinks his computer caught a virus, and if he ever finds out the truth, he will murder-suicide us both. 10 out of 10. Totally worth it. The only funny thing was the time I placed an ad in the paper saying, monkeys for sale, $50 with his number. That's a whole nother story. You'd be surprised at how many people want cheap monkeys. There are many phantom crapper stories out there where someone drops a deuce in the bathroom floor or shower. But at one of my Navy commands, we actually had someone take a crap in the coffee pot, and then run the coffee machine, fill up the pot, and leave it there for people. Luckily, someone smelled it before they tried to drink it. They never caught the guy. We had a general office questionnaire one day. Questions like, do you like your job? Do you feel listened to? Or have you been harassed at work? One person filed in yes to that last question. Massive panic within the company followed. Protocols were set up, meetings held, experts hired, and our team managers took each and every one of us separately and asked us with concern and kindness in their eyes, was it you? Did anyone hurt you? It was John. He and Fred were good friends, and always slapping each other on the butt or poking each other in the side, especially when on the phone and with a customer. He had filled in yes for a laugh because technically he was slapped on the butt. He got to explain that to the company president and was sacked shortly after. I think it's more screwed up to do an anonymous questionnaire and then ask people what they answered. Really poor ethics. Good luck to the management if they ever try to get straight answers on future surveys. They don't want straight answers, they want a paper that says everything is perfect. If doing crap like that means that people will lie next time, rather than mention any actual concerns, then that's all the better for them. Two middle-aged women, late 40s, grey hair, mom jeans, got into a fight at the office. I won't use their real names. I don't remember the context of the fight, but Deb went into Stephanie's office and closed the door, and there was a little bit of shouting and then a thud. The door flies open just in time for me to see Stephanie throwing a punch. They yell at each other in the lobby, and one of them actually says, "Let's take this outside." So they do. Some of the younger guys in the office went after them and had to break them up in the parking lot. Only one of them got fired, and they offered me her job a few days later. So I had this coworker who got a hold of the office's emergency air horn. She would sneak up behind people and blast it right in their ear. Most had a heart attack. She was really good at being sneaky with it too, and you'd be working away, have no idea, and she'd be like right under your fricking desk, and then that gosh darn air horn. Were there not huge consequences for blowing the emergency air horn to prank people? On the one hand, this is hilarious. On the other hand, I would absolutely not tolerate it in my workspace. I think the tension of not knowing where the next toot was coming from would destroy my sanity. Our office was centrally controlled by a head office in another city. There was a massive transformer explosion knocking out all the systems and controls in the head office. Essentially, no work could get done, no customers could get to us, we couldn't even cool the building down. Mid-August was 35+ degrees Celsius outside. So we had to send everyone home for about 3 days, and only essential staff stayed. I was in HR, so I was one of them. Slowly started to build up staff as we were getting closer to operation. Ended up working about 110 hours, including sleeping there. Working, however, is a very loose term. Since no PCs could run anything, we sat and watched TV, played board games and poker, played a ping pong tournament, and in our break room we had NES, SNES, and Sega. We ended up playing Super Spike Volleyball Tournament, an NES Ice Hockey Tournament, which I won, and an Excite Bike Tournament. One of the guys who had to stay on through the night played through Zelda. In conclusion, Explosion got me 70 hours of overtime while winning NES Ice Hockey Tournament with all the skinny players. Oh boy, do I have a good one. I was an intern at the time. Summer of 2013, I'm interning at a pharmaceutical/biotech company, and was meeting the team. There was this particular guy, white guy, mid-40s, on the team who I had lunch with on a daily basis. We talked about what I was studying in school at the time, and how I wanted to travel the world for a bit after graduation, instead of just going straight to a 9-to-5 office life. He got deeply depressed when I said so, and started saying he's been doing this 9-to-5 thing for 20 years. He's like 45. And what I said to him really made him wake up. I'm in my head like, oh, this isn't going to be good. Fast forward 2 days later, I'm finishing up training modules assigned to me, and all of a sudden, one of the HR ladies walks over to the manager's cube and explains that he quit. No 2 weeks' notice. And my manager bolts up and yells in disbelief, "He what? Please repeat what you just said. He went to Taiwan to find himself?" I'm trying to connect the dots to see if I, the lowly intern, had really said some things to stir up an employee to quit his job and travel the world. I didn't tell my manager the conversation I'd had with him. But I did tell one of the girls that I worked with, and that's when I started my journey of an office fling. But that's a story for another day. In conclusion, I had a casual conversation as an intern with an employee about my aspirations to travel the world after I graduate. Probably made the employee quit, don't know if it was coincidence or not, but I think the conversation stirred his actions. What event or incident happened at your job that caused a mass firing or a mass quitting? All the engineers at one job I was in had their contracts changed so that they had to buy their own tools. Due to the specialist nature of our jobs, we were all looking at over £4,000 per engineer. 10 walked and the rest threatened to strike. The boss had to give in and buy the tools himself. They had their contracts changed? I'm not an expert, but isn't that illegal? Probably yes, but the boss was such a butt, he felt he could do as he pleased with his servants. Many times he would just have the engineers working on Christmas Day. If you complained about it, he would just tell you to stop whining or get another job. One poor sod was made to work the day his wife went into labor, and he missed the birth of his child. He wasn't even allowed to phone the hospital. In the early 90s, I worked for a large construction company in Florida. I was on the road crew. One of the machines we used was called a mixer. The objective of this machine was to mix up the subgrade of a road. It had giant teeth that spin insanely fast. Well, my crew had laid down the dirt, lime rock and clay, and now had to run the mixer over it. Well, someone set the blades too low and ripped an international fiber optic cable out of the ground. A clean cut would have been bad, but this cable was shredded beyond belief. It cost $100,000 per hour that this cable was down. Luckily, I wasn't at work that day. When I came in the next day, anyone who was even near the incident got fired. My whole crew was extinct. To put it into perspective, the cable was fatter than your upper leg and composed of thousands of glass strands. Every strand had to be fused back together. It cost the company millions. Total about 40 people that day were fired, and I was put on another crew. Man, that's gotta suck if you were simply the guy holding the stop or slow sign that day. The idea is probably that everyone on the crew has a responsibility to be aware of what's going on and notice egregious errors. Not sure that it's reasonable in this particular case, but it might be. I used to work at a pickle factory in Michigan. When the new owners took over, they insisted that they change the recipe that had been the same for over 50 years without consulting the workers. Some of the employees' parents and grandparents had worked there and apparently felt so strongly about the recipe that 13 people quit and the majority were outside with signs the next days, until eventually they switched it almost all the way back. None of those who quit came back. I didn't quit, and I actually enjoyed both recipes, but now I can't tolerate the smell or taste of pickles. I used to love them. I don't know what changed in your life to make you not enjoy pickles anymore. Perhaps having a wealth of them to eat at any given times. Anyway, hope you recover, strange pickle man. I work in local government for an urban county. One of the IT departments reclassified all their employees as exempt, a designation designed for political appointments, fired them all. Only exempt employees can be fired without cause, and asked them to submit resumes if they wanted their jobs back. Their goal was to get rid of some employees they felt were dead weight. But it turns out the most valued employees, the ones with readily marketable skills in the prime of their careers, just shook their heads and had jobs elsewhere by the end of the week. Furthermore, when you pull a stunt like that, word gets out and resumes don't come flooding in. They are still trying to recover. I tried this with my dog. Haven't seen him in 2 years. Next time, don't pee on the floor, Baxter. Please come back. Worked in a bar in a nightclub. Restaurant by day, club by night. 5 bartenders behind the bar on any given Friday and Saturday, plus barbacks. Thought something was weird about our credit card tips. Went to the bar manager. We collect receipts and checkouts plus paychecks for a few weeks, examine them. Someone is withholding quite a bit of our tips. Fast forward to a Friday night, busy as heck. Owner comes in to see how things are going. Bar manager confronts him. Owner denies wrongdoing, claims what he's doing is legal. It wasn't, he was pocketing the withheld tips. Bar manager signals for me to come over, threatens to quit if the owner doesn't return the money he stole. Owner more or less says, TS. Bar manager walks out. I lean into the bar long enough to tell one of the other bartenders what happened, give the owner a snarky wave and follow him out. 5 minutes later, the rest of the bar staff join us and we wander down the road to another bar to commiserate over the bullcrap. Left over 500 people in the club with no bar staff. 0 Fs given. Found out a few days later that the daytime serving staff heard what happened and quit too. Last I heard, they had to shut down for a few weeks to restaff. Still overly proud of myself for that. Screw that guy. I was working retail and many of the workers engaged in mass exodus because the only manager anybody really liked quit. The way it happened was this. One employee was a recent hire. He basically got the position because 2 of his friends already worked there and they vouched for him. He regularly slacked off, got caught taking extra breaks, was never around when anybody needed him, and was generally a waste of space. One day, the manager everyone loves is on duty. He sends this kid out to collect carts from the lot. Now, a big group of this kid's friends have just arrived in the store. The kid goes and finds another employee and says, "Hey, the manager told me to tell you to go get the carts out of the lot," and proceeds to follow his friends around the store doing nothing. Manager sees the other employee collecting carts and asks him why he's doing it, as it's not his usual duty. So-and-so told me that you wanted me to get the carts." Manager, knowing the kid has a record as a really poor employee, is furious, hunts him down in the store and takes him to the office for a reprimand. After the reprimand, the kid leaves out the front of the store. He brings back 2 carts over the next 20 minutes. Finally, manager notices that we're completely out of carts. It's now been half an hour since he reprimanded this kid and sent him to the lot. So he goes outside to see what's up. Kid is leaning against the front wall of the building on his phone with his girlfriend. Manager fires him on the spot. The kid goes to HR to get his last check the next day. Sits down with HR manager and says that the manager everyone likes is selling illicit substances to employees, many of whom were minors, on work time. Then goes outside and calls the manager phone and leaves a message that he's going to F him up for firing him. The whole store goes nuts. There are accusations flying from management at everybody. Every single employee is pulled to HR and interrogated. Did this manager ever sell you substances? Have you ever seen him sell someone else substances? Have you ever seen him use substances? Have you ever heard him talk about using substances? No, no, no. And everyone they talk to points the finger at this disgruntled ex-employee. Everyone knows he started the rumor mill going to try and get back at his manager. The manager plays the recorded message for management that this kid left on work cell, but they dismiss it because there's no way to know it's him. Grilling continues for 3 or 4 days. Some people are pulled for multiple interviews. Gossip starts that they're going to fire this manager. They don't have any solid evidence against him, but this ex-employee and his 2 friends who still work at the store have provided stories that match one another. Well, no crap, they hang out every day and these interviews lasted almost a week. Enough that they think the manager needs to be fired. Manager doesn't wait for them to do it. He walks in one day and says, "Screw this, I quit. I drafted my letter of resignation when this crap started. Here's my keys." About half the employees on staff walked right out there when he did. Almost everyone else quit within the next week. The last I heard, the only people who didn't quit were the 2 friends of the kid who never did his job. Does anyone else who's ever worked a bad hospitality or retail job get the vicarious sense of joy out of these stories? Who am I kidding? You clicked the thumbnail for some sweet quitting fantasies. My mum used to work for a college. She started there as a secretary when the college was just starting out and gradually moved up until she was running the whole business department. Without her knowing, the college ran interviews and hired a woman to be her superior. They never asked my mum to apply for the position and never mentioned it to her until the day this woman is introduced to her. And my mum's boss informed my mum she was supposed to train this woman to be her boss for the department. My mum was clearly hurt and upset, but she needed her job and she couldn't quit, so she sucked it up and trained this woman while putting on her best face and being cordial. All the rest of the people who worked under my mum in the department could not stand this woman and were incredibly upset by the situation as well. One morning, my mum walks through the doors and the boss of the college is waiting for her. He brings her into his office and fires her. Within the month, the rest of the department all quit as well, leaving them to hire and train all new people right before the fall semester started. 6 months later, the woman they hired to replace my mum quit, and they had the balls to call my mum and ask her back. You can guess where she told them to shove it. I was hired by a man who owned 3 pizza chain stores. I trained at one store, worked there for a few months when I found out he wanted me to transfer to a different store, and after a few weeks become the manager. Woohoo! Well, the new store, the current manager, every single day spent a few hours on the phone with her significant other, screaming and yelling and crying, right in front of customers. The employees would get high in the walk-in fridge. I'm not actually too bothered by that if they actually did any more work than the total minimum. So here I am, hired by the store owner, not the manager, who had hired all of her friends. They didn't like me, they called me a B-word, a goody two-shoes, they were absolutely right. I fired all of them except for one new girl that started the week before I did. It was a glorious moment, the most B-word moment of my life. Mother frickers won't help me mop the floor, you're fired. Our company was bought by a larger company. The sales and marketing team got a new boss. Within a few weeks of this first meeting with the new boss, 75% of the team quit. No one outside of the team knew why. A few months later, I met the new head of sales and marketing. He was insane. When one of the top sales guys put his 2 weeks notice in, he was escorted off the company property within an hour. The next guy who resigned was told that he had to work the rest of the week with no pay so he could transfer his accounts over. Someone in HR had to explain to him that this is slavery and illegal. In conclusion, the new boss was insane and tried to bring slavery back. Our general manager was fired, everyone loved him, and they brought in a new GM who took away ending times to shifts, so we had to stay until he said we could go, while most of us were college students trying to schedule classes. And he took away all of the employee perks, we even had to pay full price on a $1 sub day. Everyone quit. There were only 2 people working there 2 months later. I worked at Wendy's. One of the shift managers quit for personal reasons, so the regional manager had all the other shift managers cover the now open shifts. The shift managers were now working overtime and didn't want to. They gave the regional manager a deadline of a month to get a new shift manager. A month goes by and the shift managers confront the regional manager because there's been no replacements. Turns out he hasn't even posted a job listing yet. They were so livid that all of them quit on the same day. Now the regional manager had to take all the shifts until he could hire new people, and he did a terrible job too. Normally 4 to 6 people were working at a time at our location because it wasn't dead slow, but wasn't a hotspot. 6 only usually hitting a few hours overlap during expected rushes. With him as manager, he expected 7 people to be working all the time. This means he increased all of our hours as well, and had no respect for the hours people usually worked. This caused another mass exodus of normal workers, including me, because I didn't want to work full-time while going to school. I don't know if anyone else has had the boss that refuses to take a single step to solve the acknowledged problem in a workplace they promised to fix, but I have, and I still relish the day I shouted at them and walked out. Train company in Sweden. One day, many years ago, someone found a document stating some changes to overtime policy. It was just lying on a table in the middle of the break room. 1 copy only. Due to the nature of the business, there tends to be a lot of shifting hours back and forth. Sometimes we, drivers, can get home hours and hours early, and other times we get horrendously late. Hence, overtime. The document stated that now overtime forms had to be filled for when we come home early. Undertime, so to speak. This otherwise already scheduled time would be withdrawn, and the company would then be able to reuse that time. Negative overtime. 1 copy on a table, and a few hours later people had come in from all over in a major huff. There were outright and immediate resignations, shouting matches, phone calls to union representatives, a huge outcry overall. Date on the document and the day it was found, April 1st. Much fun was had. No one got into any trouble from what I recall. It was from the higher-ups, and pretty much everyone else in administrative staff knew about it. Still, they hadn't quite anticipated the crap storm. Even telling people that it was an April Fool's joke to their faces didn't work. Oh wow, beautiful from a very watch the world burn kind of way. I worked in a call center and they got us all together on April 1st and told us they were going to lay off 20% of the workforce, and we all chuckled. It wasn't a joke. April 1st is the first day of the 3rd fiscal quarter, midpoint of the year. Please tell me someone got in deep crap for that first bad joke. We had something similar happen. One day we got a mail from some higher-ups that the reception desk would now only be open from 9 a.m. till 2 p.m. Some people got upset, stating that it was Freaking stupid, they can't run a company like this until someone, me, pointed out that it was April 1st. People in the office calmed down, realizing they wouldn't do something that dumb. Plot twist, the next day, it wasn't a joke. They were serious. In a team of 30 IT consultants that had been working a big project for a couple of years, the standing offer that governed rates, etc. had been defined and would continue for the next few years. But the renewal deadline for each of our individual contracts with the contracting company, middleman, was just a week away and we hadn't seen the paperwork, just promises that we were being renewed. Finally get to the paperwork and see a 10% cut in rates. Quite surprised because the standing offer didn't have any such change. Contracting company says the client department renegotiated new rates by saying that another company would be used instead. We were shocked that the client would put such a big project at risk. People made inquiries. It turns out the client department had made no such changes. The contracting company was just making a grab for a bigger piece of the pie. There was outrage. People quit. Other people yelled and got fired, etc. The company had to quickly backpedal and claim it was an administrative error. Yeah, right. But the damage was done. It didn't end there, though. About 6 months later, a small group of consultants on another project merged with us. They had been working under the same contract vehicle. As we're getting to know these 5 guys, one of them says, "That 30% cut 6 months ago was nasty, eh?" Turns out the company got from these guys what they couldn't get from us, and these poor suckers hadn't known it was fiction. Crap hits the fan once again. The 5 quit en masse. Problem was their jobs were critical. They got hired back with hefty raises, almost double their original if memory serves. Stupid, greedy company. I worked in the corporate headquarters for a large national retailer. After 20 years in business, the company was sold to an arrogant billionaire who put his son in charge. His first job after completing his MBA. The son decided to relocate headquarters 500 miles away, close to his daddy's headquarters. He gave us 30 days notice to move, with no moving compensation, or lose our jobs. Out of 300 employees, 1 moved. I accepted a new position the day after the announcement, and gave 2 weeks' notice. My boss went ballistic and said, "What are we supposed to do? No one can fill your job here, and we won't have anyone new until we move. You're not a team player." Bonus, the company was out of business within 60 days after the move, 4 days after the acquisition. They had spent $50 million to buy it. "You're not a team player," he shouts as he upends his team's lives on a whim for his own personal comfort. My goodness. Competing company in a similar but not identical line of business tried for years to replicate our product with no success. They scrapped the project and took the R&D money and bought our company instead. Fired 600 people in 1 day. I was one of them. I hear from those who remained the place is awful now. I was the lead cook in a $1 million kitchen at a multi-million-dollar high-end restaurant. The executive chef had been there since they opened and worked his way from the bottom to the top in 4 years. That place was his whole life and he was completely dedicated to it. The absentee owners had hired a do-nothing, know-nothing manager. After weeks of complaining, the owners had a meeting with the manager and gave him a week to get on top of his job. The chef went on vacation that week. The manager saw this as an opportunity to buddy up with the owners. A week and 2 rounds of golf later, the chef comes back to work to a pink slip. 27 out of 30 employees came in and resigned immediately after. Oh boy, I think I might have a winning story. When I was in high school, I took a part-time job doing tech support for a dial-up ISP. The company was pretty small and only had a handful of employees. The owner's wife did HR and accounting. Her brother was in charge of the technical operations and was my boss, plus a web developer and the regular tech support guy, who were best friends. There were also a handful of developers at a sister company which develops custom software. My work schedule was evenings a few days per week, plus normal hours on the weekend. My boss was usually there before me on Saturdays, but one week I was surprised to find that the office was locked. As the day progressed, I became increasingly confused by the fact that nobody else had shown up. There was almost always a few people at least passing through, but I'd been there all morning without seeing anyone at all. Finally, after a few hours, my boss walks in and said, "You're probably wondering where everyone is." He told me that everyone except me, the owner and his wife, had quit. He wouldn't say why, but he assured me that it wasn't something I needed to worry about, and that, since his job was vital, he was going to stay at the company until a replacement could be found. I tried to find out what was happening, but he said I'd have to talk to the owner. When the owner arrived, there was clearly tension between the two of them. He also wouldn't tell me what happened, but was very eager to make sure I wasn't going to jump ship. Eventually they hired new employees and found a replacement for my boss, and things went back to normal. But I still didn't have any idea what the hell happened, and the owner clearly wasn't interested in discussing it. Cut to a few months later, I'm walking around the show floor at the Macworld conference in New York when I bump into the former tech support guy and former web developer. We spent a few minutes catching up, and then the tech support guy grins and says, "So, do you know what happened? Why everyone quit?" Me? "No, but I've certainly been curious. The owner didn't tell me and I didn't want to pry." Tech? "He and his wife got excommunicated." Me? Blank stare. Tech? "Didn't you know we're all Jehovah's Witnesses?" Apparently everyone knew each other from church, and Jehovah's Witnesses aren't allowed to have anything to do with people who have been excommunicated. It wasn't until years later that I learned that the owner and his wife were swingers, and someone in the church found out. Plot twist! Listen, I don't think anyone should be excluded from a workplace for their private lifestyle choices if everyone was consenting adults and they weren't hurting anyone, but at least it makes for a good story. You remember Walden Books, the store in the mall? I had a friend who worked there as a store manager. They hired him to clean up the store. It was a total wreck. Dozens of unopened shipment boxes crammed in the back room, behind the cash wrap, even under shelves. He found new releases from 3 months back that were never available to buy. It was really, really bad. On top of that, the district manager who hired him told him he had 3 weeks to get the store in order without extra hours and without sales dropping. If you've worked in retail before, you know that this is impossible. My friend argues with the DM, and the DM basically tells him that he doesn't care if they work off the clock to get it done, it will be done, or he'll turn the entire staff. Fire them. So for 3 weeks, my friend and his staff worked 24/7, only clocking in for allotted shifts. My friend would even sleep in the back room in a sleeping bag, and miracle upon miracles, he got it cleaned up before the deadline. The deadline comes and the DM comes back with 2 LP operatives. They start pulling the staff one by one to the back and grill them until they get them to admit to working off the clock. When they get to my friend, she tells them outright that the DM told him to do it, and the DM sat there and denied the whole thing. So he says to the LP guys, "How else would we get this done with the deadline time allotted? You know what the store looked like before and you know how much time we had." The LP guys just looked at each other and then fired the entire staff. That same day, a manager and 3 associates were hired. The DM already had them in the wings and was just waiting for my friend to get the store in working order to pass it off to his friend. Managers. What was the worst case of, "I demand to speak to the manager," that you've ever experienced? I told a customer buying makeup what products she should use on her deeper skin tone, and I'm now racist because I don't want her looking dead at the club. I worked in a high-end makeup store in Manhattan. We saw all kinds of people with all kinds of complexions and concerns, and you learned pretty fast what words work best to cushion the blow for some of the stuff. For example, texture instead of wrinkles, deeper or richer instead of darker. One thing that's always fun to have to explain is what flashback is. On deeper skin tones, a lot of setting powders will catch the light when a flash photo is taken. It'll basically make the person look like they have baby powder on their face, or make them look grey. It's super embarrassing and sort of immediately tells the world that you don't know how to use your makeup. Also, all your photos from your event or night out are ruined, so it's pretty sucky all around. Side note, I'm blonde and I use the Big C mixed with white out as a bronzer. I'm really white. For those of you confused, the Big C is an illegal substance that I can't use the real name of in this YouTube video. I was talking to a customer who had amazing, super deep skin. She was really cool and I was talking to her like a regular human being, and she was looking for a setting powder. Her friend was with her who likes honey beige, so pretty light. She was trying to get her to buy a translucent, which translates to white people and white people who are tan. When I asked her how she's going to use it, she had planned to bake, makeup baking, with it, and that cuts out like 80% of the setting powders we had. This was a couple of years ago, so we didn't have all that many medium-deep appropriate setting powders yet. I explained to her what flashback was, and I told her she could set her makeup with a powder foundation or either of those 2 setting powders. I told her that her friends might really like some of the other one and tell you to buy it, but with your beautiful skin, you kind of have to use different products. I then said that at some point the makeup industry will realize that there is an entire continent that also needs to set their makeup, but apparently we're not there yet. The customer laughed, she picked up one of the things I was showing her, and said, "Thank you," in the, "You're so kind, I'm so happy I found you today," kind of sing-song tone. Some other customer overheard some of this conversation and told my manager I was telling a customer that we didn't serve people like her. She was apparently yelling at my manager about how racist I was. I was so comfortable in this conversation with my equal that at some point I had said dark skin instead of deeper skin tones. This is apparently a huge insult to some people. It wasn't, however, to the woman living in her deeper skin looking for some damn setting powder. The woman who complained was a white lady. I was furious. Not only because this random woman overheard something that made me look racist, I was mad because I'm white and color theory and oxidation, a lot of deep shades that look great when you first swatch, but turn orange in an hour or so, for deeper skin tones is a lot more complicated, in my opinion, than for white folks. It took me years to understand the differences in tone and shade and how the products oxidize. It took me just as long to learn how to tell a black woman that 80% of what we sell here isn't going to work for you and have her leave happy, confident, and not disappointed. At Red Lobster, someone grabbed the manager and told him his shrimp was cold, wanted a free beer, and he could get better fish by fishing. This manager was my dad and was meeting us after work and apparently looked like an authority figure since he had a tie on. My dad replied, "That's cocktail shrimp, you moron." I recently had an experience where I was at a restaurant having a meeting for my volunteer work, and a guy mistook me for their waitress. I was walking back from the bathroom when he very obnoxiously huffed and yelled from a distance at me, "Excuse me, can we please get some more silverware?" I just stared at him for a good 10 seconds, dumbfounded because of his tone, before saying, "I don't work here." He immediately turned bright red and his demeanor went back to talking to me like a human. Maybe he had been waiting a long time for silverware, but I couldn't help but feel bad for his actual waitress. No idea why, I have a distinct look that didn't fit in with the waiters or waitresses, and I was wearing a t-shirt with my alma mater on it, while the servers were in black button-ups. Worked for a passenger railroad in Cincinnati, 23, male, wear reflective high-vis shirt and pants. We have to run ahead of our dinner train and flag each crossing, stopping traffic due to a ridiculous rule set by the railroad we run on. Mind you, we go 7 to 10 miles per hour, fairly easy to keep up with. Saturday, I drive up to a crossing with the lights flashing already and start flagging cars across since the train is at least 1 minute away. Middle-aged man drives up to me, stops before the crossing. I wave harder at him to come through. He speeds up beside me and stops on the crossing. "I don't know you're with the railroad. You could just be some yahoo." "What?" "Okay, sir, continue on. The train is right there." "Why should I listen to some young kid like you?" "Because if you don't, you're getting hit by the freaking train. Now move." "I'll be speaking with your manager." As he drives off, I get teed off and throw a flag on the ground. An hour later, I'm back as the train goes the other way. My general manager, 23, male, 6 foot tall, is standing with me helping protect the crossing. Man returns, yells at him, "Who's your manager? I'd like to report him for being a butthole." Boss looks at me, turns to him and says, "I am. Now get the frick off my railroad." Guy gently drives away. In conclusion, older man stops on railroad tracks, is butthole, manager is the bigger, better butthole. As a mild-mannered Northern European, I've always been thankful for when I've had a bigger, meaner person on my side at the workplace whenever I've been browbeaten by a customer. I work in the admissions department at a zoo. We work closely with the membership department and are really friendly with each other. When people purchase membership, they get a card that says their name, how many adults, how many children, if they're allowed to bring in a guest, etc. The card says clearly that you must show ID per card. Sometimes we're friendly or lazy and ask for one ID for the whole group. Well, a week ago, some guy didn't have his ID. I don't know how he drove to the zoo since you need a form of ID to drive, and we told him that without an ID, we can't let him in. The guy got mad and started screaming at us, saying random crap to us. He demanded to see a manager. Good thing our manager, for admission not membership, was on site. She explained to the guy that without ID, we can't let him go in, showed him on the card where it explains to show ID. The guy screams at her and says that because he paid for the membership, he should be allowed to go in without an ID. My manager responded, "No ID, no entry." He asked to see a manager. Her response was, "I am the manager." He then asks if there was someone higher up that he could speak to. She told him, "If you want to do anything, you'll have to speak with membership." So he goes to membership and they told us he was being a butthole and screaming that he paid for it and blah blah blah. The manager for membership was called and because he screamed at him, they denied his entry to the zoo. I worked at an independent chocolate shop that sold various flavors of truffles, brownies, and drinks. We had non-dairy options, vegan options, and nut-free options. A woman demanded to speak with the manager because we did not have any dairy-free, nut-free, sugar-free vegan options. Luckily, the owner literally just laughed and said, "We do have one. It's called water." I have never seen such entitled rage. If said shop happened to be in a weird yuppie or foodie type of area, I bet they could make carob goods for nut jobs like this woman. Fake chocolate with fake sugar and charge considerably more than normal for it because it's specialty. Even if they tasted freaking horrible, fad dieters would buy them up in a heartbeat. What in Thor's name does that girl eat if she can't eat dairy, nuts, sugar, and has to keep vegan? I worked the customer service desk at a grocery store. One afternoon, a guy came storming over after getting checked out and threw a package of beef in front of me. He starts going off, yelling and cussing at me because he was supposed to get a $3.54 discount, but the register only took off $3.53. He was screaming at me that he wanted his penny back and that it wasn't even about the penny, but the principle of the thing. By the time he was through, he had yelled at me, my customer service manager, and our store manager on duty. As soon as I gave him that penny, though, he shut right up and left. Principle of the thing, I guess. I was a shift lead at a GameStop and was the manager on duty with one other associate in the store. We were pretty busy, both the other employee and I were on registers, ringing through our respective lines. Poor guy I work with gets this soccer mum haircut that I knew was going to be trouble, and she's trying to return a new game that had the seal broken on it. Against return policy, can't help you. So lady then gets really upset and demands to cancel all of her son's pre-orders. My guy obliges and is preparing to give her refund and store credit because her son had only paid for the pre-orders with trades. You can't match tenders, so my guy informed her so. That was just it. She was instantly screaming and calling my associate a liar. He literally turns the computer screen towards her and shows her the entries in trade credit, but she isn't having it. "Let me speak to your manager." Dude points to me, I wrap up with my customer, and we trade registers so he can keep helping out. I ask her how I can help, to which she screams her experience at me. I reiterate what my buddy informed her, and that there isn't any way that we can get her cash back. She claims, "Well, I'm gonna call your corporate office and tell them that your policy doesn't apply to me. I've never been treated like this before." To which I happily offer her the corporate number and advise her that telling a corporate customer service line that they believe they are exempt from policy is probably not the best strategy. Woman gets red in the face and starts looking around the store, and God forbid the poor man, the old manager, walks in. He does not work there anymore, but the woman recognizes him from his time at the store. She begins to accuse me of lying to her because she knows that he is the real manager and that he can be of help to her. Nope, dude is just trying to stop. She ended up just leaving in a huff. There is a fairly well-used GIF or GIF of Homer Simpson shrinking into a hedge. I choose to believe that the old manager did this into the shelves of GameStop when he heard the conversation. Yikes. Worked front desk of a hotel. Had a woman throw a gosh darn tantrum because the state we were in charged a 6% room tax. She demanded that I remove the tax. I told her that we had no control over taxes. She still wouldn't accept the reality of taxes, so I printed off the contact information on her state representative and told her to direct her complaints to them. She did not like that at all. She started screaming, so I got my manager. My manager said basically what I said, that we cannot legally remove a tax. So the woman grabbed the bowl of mince from the counter and threw it at my head and stormed out. We had her credit card on file and charged her for the full amount. I had a regular repeat guest get upset because the room she normally stayed in was booked prior to her check-in and wouldn't be free for a few days. I apologized and promised her the room once it opened up. She got really angry and started demanding that I make the guest that had been in the room for a few days move because that room was her room. I continued apologizing and telling her that she'd get it in a few days. She asked to speak to my manager and yelled at my manager that just because I was pretty didn't mean that I knew what I was talking about and I should be let go. My manager ended up giving the guest the same information I had given her and telling the guest that I wouldn't be fired as I had excellent customer service skills. Weirdest complaint, insult, compliment ever. I had a woman call in to tell me that she had spent too little on an ice cream cone. We had a special that was like 2 scoops and a waffle cone for $5, and for some reason she only got 1 scoop and said she didn't know about the special, despite there being signs all over the shop about it. She claimed that my worker didn't offer it to her. I didn't focus on upselling at the store, so this wasn't a big deal to me. I apologized to her, but was also like, what exactly do you want me to do about it? This happened yesterday. I'm assuming you ate the ice cream, so you can't return it. She wanted a refund anyway for the inconvenience. I asked if she had a receipt. She said she didn't. I said, no go without a receipt. She said she didn't get one at checkout. I explained to her that in my state we're not required by law to give a receipt for cash-purchased food service items. So if she didn't ask for one, tough. She kept pressing, saying she demanded to speak to the manager. I explained I was the manager. She then asked if there was another manager she could speak to. I told her no. I was end of the line, top of the heap. No one else was going to tell her anything different. She huffed and told me she would be by to discuss it in person. She never came in. These stories are giving me flashbacks of all the times people asked for the corporate number, because that happened to me all the time at the car wash I used to run. I was it, top of the line. The owners cared about the company but didn't give a rat's butt about customer complaints. They were told to never give out information about them. Not numbers, not names, not any other businesses they owned, nothing. So when you got some B-word yelling and screaming at you because you're following company policy to not rewash a $3 car wash and she wants corporate's number, you get to tell her that you are as high as it goes, there is no corporate. Well, do you own it then? And I couldn't lie. Nope, I'd tell her. Then get me the owner's number. They'd always act so smug, like they said the magic words to open a secret cave door. Sorry, but they prefer to remain private. They've trusted me to run this location, to do the hiring and firing, to process the payroll, to order parts and supplies, to deal with the insurance company, to repair broken equipment, and to deal with any and all customer issues and complaints. It'd either end here with them insisting that they would find the owner's information and have me fired because I followed the owner's instructions, or they'd yell and I would call the cops. Sorry, I'm having flashbacks. God, that was an awful time. Obligatory not a manager but. Maybe not the worst, but this was definitely the dumbest I've ever seen. A sign was accidentally left up from earlier in the week advertising men's Levi's as buy one, get one half off. So for 2 pairs it would be roughly $90. The current sale was to get 2 pairs for $70. Had a lady pitch an absolute fit that they weren't ringing up to buy one, get one half off, she was being ripped off, etc. Tried and tried to explain to her that we had accidentally missed a sign, but she was actually getting a better deal at the current price. She wouldn't have any of it and demanded to speak to the manager. Store leader comes out and tells her the exact same thing, but the lady will not listen and is adamant about getting them at the price on the sign. Store leader finally gives up and tells me to just go ahead and do a price override and charge her the extra money. Lady leaves smugly, like she thinks she's just worked us over big time, and makes some kind of comment about how I need to learn to listen to customers on the way out. In conclusion, the lady spent an extra $20 on jeans because she wanted them for the price on an old sign. There's a saying from somewhere that I remember in this instance: people would rather be right than be happy. I guess the victory of this situation gave this person the satisfaction she was missing from her bland and terrible life. When I worked at Starbucks, we, as you can imagine, had plenty of crappy entitled people come in expecting the world of employees, barely paid above minimum wage, who've been awake since 3 a.m. or earlier. We had people blaming us for the fact that they were late for work and were going to be fired. People blaming us for being late picking up their kids, kids blaming us for being late to school. Plenty of, but I ordered a venti, why did you give me a grande? Or, this coffee is cold because I've left it sitting out for an hour, but I want you to make me a new one for free. Or, you aren't being enthusiastic enough after 8 hours of being here and so sleep deprived you don't know what your name is. But the worst/funniest was Libby. Libby was a regular who we really wished wasn't. She was overly demanding and had one of those super complicated, half-calf, double soy, triple whip, hold the cream, half the sugar, do a backflip when you serve me types. And she could tell if you got her order wrong and would make you remake it until it was right. She would also steal from our tip jar right in front of our faces. She'd pretend to put a 5 in and then pull out 4 ones, but she'd take out 5 or 6 ones instead. And one time during this little switcheroo of hers, she accidentally dropped a $100 bill out of her wallet. The good thing about Libby was that she only came in once or twice a week, but that meant that we were the ones who had to find this $100 bill for her. She didn't notice it for a few hours afterwards, and when she did, she called in and asked for the manager, and asked her if she had seen it. Since she would have dropped it out in the lobby, where we very rarely went since we were so busy in BOH, we went out to check but found nothing and told her that a customer must have taken it, and that we were sorry, but there was nothing she could do. She flipped her crap. That's my rent money. I'm going to be kicked out of my house. Do you want me to be homeless? You hate me and want me to be homeless, you crappy effers? I hate you, and you're terrible. Go frick off and die. The supervisor came out and gave me the gist of what she'd said while begging me to find this money. There were also some racist accusations since the neighborhood of this Starbucks was predominantly immigrants, and Libby was your standard white liberal until put under pressure. Anyway, so a week passes and still the money hasn't shown up. Libby calls us each day, multiple times a day, to find out if we found her money. Sometimes she yells and screams, sometimes she doesn't. Either way, the answer's always the same: we haven't found her money. So she comes in again and pretends like she hasn't been cussing us out for a week straight, is all happy and bubbly and jokes about losing the money and how she's just so scatterbrained sometimes, haha. She tries to talk me into giving her a free coffee since we lost her money, but I tell her that she has to pay anyway. She grumbles and opens up her wallet, pulls out her card, and out flutters a $100 bill and lands on the counter. We both look at it. She looks into her wallet and after a moment goes, "Oh, that's right. I hid $100 in my credit card slot for safekeeping so I wouldn't lose it. You can stop looking for my money now." That was it. No apologies for the abuse throughout the week, the accusations, anything. I know I shouldn't expect one, but darn, I think she realized that she fricked up though, because she didn't show back up for a couple of weeks. In conclusion, she thought we stole her money after she stole our money, later found her money in her wallet safe and sound. I was busy at Christmas at an old job sorting out wrapping paper, etc. The queue got large, so I jumped on the till. A customer approached and complained about having to pay 5 pence for a plastic bag. The charge just started. She said she wasn't going to pay, so I charged her and asked for the next customer. She moaned that she wouldn't be able to carry everything. I asked for 5 pence. She asked to speak to my supervisor. I said I'll go get him. I left the tills, turned a corner, waited a few seconds, and reappeared, informing her that I was in charge. I once had a customer buy $80 worth of cheap black t-shirts, then complain about the 10-cent per bag charge. What a ripoff! This is ridiculous! Okay, have fun carrying a stack of shirts to your car, you penny-pinching jackass. I was the VP of sales for an F500 here in the States. At about 6:30 p.m., my office phone rang and it was a person from HR asking if I could take a call in which the client was irate and threatening legal action. I get on the phone and quickly realize there is zero chance of making this man happy. And ironically, I'm a big fan of firing crappy clients. The things he was demanding was simply ridiculous, and I politely refused. I also stated that I would personally allow his company out from its contract with no fees or costs. Of course, still not good enough, I eventually hung up due to the screaming and foul language. Long story short, I found out the next day he was arrested for trespassing that evening, while trying to enter our corporate suburban office with 2 guns. But the joke was on him because I worked in our corporate downtown office. I used to work at the concession stand/cafe at the Tennessee Performing Arts Center. We had snacks like potato chips and candy, as well as pre-made sandwiches from a local sandwich shop. We only got a certain number of sandwiches for each day, so when we ran out, that was it. This one lady who was in a wheelchair came through my line telling me how she was diabetic and needed to eat a meal. I showed her that we had trail mix, candy, and chips, but she absolutely could not eat any of that because she was diabetic. It had to be a sandwich and nothing else. I told her we literally didn't have any sandwiches left, but she just kept repeating about how she was diabetic, and she told me there would be sandwiches. She was being incredibly rude to me, making a scene, and said, "I was told there would be sandwiches," probably about 10 times. By this point, there was a long line forming behind her while she was making a scene. She asked for the manager, so I told her she could step out of line and wait for the manager, but she wouldn't budge. The manager came over and told her the exact thing that I had. She eventually calmed down, moved out of the line, and agreed to have chips and candy. For free. I don't know who the frick told her about the sandwiches, but I want to slap them. What are some weird historical facts or events that most people don't know about? Ibrahim I, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, had 280 of his concubines drowned in the ocean because one of them had slept with another man. A slightly more positive fact is that officially the longest war in history was between the Netherlands and the Isle of Sicily. It lasted from 1651 to 1985, 335 years. There were no casualties. Gets posted on Reddit pretty often, but still unknown to some. In 1932, the Australian Army gathered machine guns and went to war against a bunch of emus in what would be known as the Great Emu War. I read this and kind of forgot what an emu was, and then I thought they were those little furry guys in Star Wars, and was super confused for like 10 seconds. Emus are vicious, heartless monsters whose sole reason for existence is to remind us that dinosaurs used to be in charge. Didn't the Wikipedia page have a casualties section at one point, under which was listed dignity? If your grandparents are over the age of 80, they will have lived for 1/3 of US history. If you're 30, you've lived for 1/8 of US history. When the barbarians sacked Carthage, they burned and pillaged pretty much everything but the sanctuary where Saint Augustine was staying. He was on his deathbed, and the barbarians respected him so much for his influence, even though they hated the church, that they decided to leave him alone. There was a gang war called the Great Nordic Biker War, where hundreds of American bikers stole armaments from several Scandinavian military bases and terrorized the streets while killing each other. If I recall correctly, they stole the weapons originally to sell back to the States, but the banditos used an anti-tank rocket to destroy a Hells Angels clubhouse in Sweden. You change a couple of locations and this is the plot to Sons of Anarchy. Let it be known that this sent the Nordic countries-based narrator scurrying to Wikipedia, where he was shocked to learn that the whole debacle was in fact a thing with nearly 100 casualties. During the 16th century, Nicolas Fouquet was the Minister of Finances in France under King Louis XIV. He had the castle of Vaux-le-Vicomte built for a crap ton of money, and had the most rad parties there. 16th century, they still said things like rad then. He invited the king to one of these parties and made it the raddest of all the rad parties, like top 3 raddest in France's history. Looking at all the food and fireworks and fountains and all the bling, King Louis XIV found it suspicious. Where was this money coming from? He was also very much jealous of such splendor when his own castle was mostly empty. So Louis XIV had Fouquet arrested, imprisoned, and then investigated and found guilty. In that order. Arrested by D'Artagnan, the guy who inspired Alexandre Dumas' Fourth Musketeer. And then he ordered the castle of Versailles to be made even more beautiful than Vaux-le-Vicomte. In conclusion, Versailles Castle was built as it is today because the king was jealous of his Minister of Finances, among other reasons. The CIA made a spy cat, a cat that could lurk around and record information, that they sunk several $1 million into, and it promptly walked into traffic. The Soviets had anti-tank dogs they strapped explosives to, that didn't want to run at the tanks for obvious reasons and frequently blew up their own forces. I always heard the Soviet anti-tank dogs failed because they were trained with Soviet tanks, so promptly ignored the enemy and went straight towards Soviet tanks, as they were trained to do. When Fort Sumter was attacked by the Confederates in 1861, no one had gotten killed from the attack, but the Confederates later had a party, for a reason I do not know, and when one of their drunk butts shot a gun, it killed one of their own. That was the only death that occurred during the 3 days of the attack on Fort Sumter. Confederates kept on partying even though they saw the man dead. President Lyndon B. Johnson would have highways cleared out by the Secret Service, get in a car with a 6-pack of beer, and gun it down the highway, downing beer after beer. You can leave Texas, but the Texas never leaves you. The Romans used human urine as mouthwash. Pisterine, anyone? During the evacuation of Dunkirk in World War II, in that moment of despair, desperation, and overall bleakness, on the beach there was a workers' strike by a group of British rail workers regarding overtime. Very strange thing to happen in the face of events. That Henry Ford attempted to build an entire city in the middle of the Amazon to supply his company, and the United States, with a reliable source of rubber. Unfortunately, the entire scheme fell apart, although one can still visit the ruins on the site, complete with all the amenities 1920s Americans could want. Salieri did not kill Mozart. This is a legend. Mozart drank and died in poverty. I heard also that it was a myth that he died in poverty and had a pauper's burial. Apparently, a lot of money was spent on his funeral as well. 10-minute lobotomies. 2 methods were used. Either you had to drill holes in the head, or the later method that was using a metal pick to hammer through the eye sockets. In both methods, a metal instrument was used to mush brain. Local anesthesia was used, the patient could go home in the same day. The doctor did a couple of thousand of these and could do multiple surgeries a day. Also, because anesthetic was costly, they just stunned the patient with an electroshock therapy machine, which was pretty commonly available. Max Tremmel, a priest on the Winter Walk one day in 1894, witnessed a young boy slip through some broken ice on the River Inn and saved the boy from certain drowning. That boy would grow up to be the Chancellor of the Third Reich. In 1919, a molasses storage tank busted. A wave of molasses, 25 feet high, ripped through the streets of Boston, killing 21 people and injuring 150 others. It is estimated that the tank contained 2.3 million gallons, 87,000 cubic meters, of molasses when it collapsed. It became known as the Great Molasses Flood. They should have called it the Molassacre. London also had a great beer flood. 135,000 imperial gallons of beer destroyed several streets. Not that it's a competition or anything. I would like to note that the massacre both killed and injured more people than the Great Nordic Biker War, proving both that it was a very sticky situation and that even a Nordic biker war is a very mild affair. The Twilight Zone was one of the first television shows to feature a nearly all-black cast on a dramatic show that was not dealing with racial issues. This was all because Rod Serling, who was quoted in saying, "Television, like its big sister, the motion picture, has been guilty of a sin of omission. Hungry for talent, desperate for the so-called new face, constantly searching for a transfusion of new blood, it has overlooked a source of wondrous talent that resides under its nose. This is the Negro actor." The episode was The Tall Big Wish, which was part of the first season of the show, and it was awarded the 1961 Unity Award for Outstanding Contributions to Better Race Relations. Did he just talk like he was introducing the Twilight Zone? Thomas Jefferson and John Adams both died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, America's 50th birthday. Adams's last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives." He was wrong. Jefferson had died hours earlier in Virginia. Apparently, 3 presidents died on July 4th, although James Monroe was not in the same year. During his travels in Africa, the guy that invented Jameson liquor bought an 11-year-old girl as a forced laborer, and then fed her to cannibals just to see what it was like. He sketched while they ate her. Not really weird, but a fun piece of history that not many people know is about the origin of an announcer calling a horse race. On February 5th, 1927, in Tijuana, Mexico, there was a film being shot at the racetrack. A track official noticed the way a director was using a microphone and a loudspeaker to direct his crew and actors during the filming. The idea came to him that if he had a microphone set up in the steward's booth that led to a set of speakers, he could call the position of horses like a director gave direction. Later that day, he had it set up without telling any of the patrons to the track about it. When people first experienced it, they were extremely confused. Before that, people would keep track of the horses themselves with binoculars and were often unable to get a great view at certain angles. After they got used to it, they loved hearing a race being called, and it became an everyday thing at that small track. Now it's an extremely important part of modern-day racing all across the world, and even people that aren't familiar with the sport know about it. Fidel Castro actually wanted to be allies with America, since they were only 70 miles north and a world superpower, and Cuba desperately needed economic assistance. But because of containment and strong anti-communist sentiment, Eisenhower and Nixon both refused to meet him. So Castro turned to the other world superpower, the Soviet Union, for economic assistance, and Khrushchev welcomed him with open arms. And that's how the Cuban Missile Crisis began. The Roman Senate of the Roman Republic wasn't officially supposed to be a legislative body with authority to pass laws. Officially, it could only recommend legislation to the magistrates, who didn't technically have to obey. However, there was an extremely strong precedent to obey official advice from the Senate, so it almost always was followed during the Republican period. During the Empire, the authority of the Senate was reduced further. It's worth noting, however, that the Senate didn't only issue advice. Outside of legislative issues, they did have other authorities and powers in addition to the immense influence they carried. It's treason, then. In medieval times, the accused often faced a trial by ordeal, where they were forced to stick their arms into a vat of boiling water. If their arm emerged unscathed, it was believed God protected them, thus proving their innocence. They also had a trial by iron up to the 18th century, where you had to hold a red-hot iron bar in your hand and run a specified distance. The hand would then be wrapped up, and you would wait a few days. If your hand or skin was corrupted when the bandages came off, then that was God determining your guilt, and you were hanged. Simpler times. It's a bit more complicated than that. The hand would be withdrawn and then treated and bandaged. The bandage would be removed a week later. If the wound had turned septic, you were guilty. If not, you weren't. The hand didn't have to be unscathed, that is after all what scathing means. This was all managed anyway. The guys in charge of the trial would sometimes allow the water to cool somewhat before the hand was put in. This could probably be managed by payment, or if they liked you more than they liked the accuser. Yes, as a history student, it is always worth noting that where things like this that are shocking to our sensibilities come up, they were often much more nuanced and seldom used than factoids like this would have you believe. Most people didn't want to kill their neighbors, especially ones who were very useful to the community. Something I always like to talk about, there once existed an alleged theoretical state of war that lasted 335 years and 19 days, and was between the Dutch and an archipelago off the coast of southwest England called the Isle of Scilly. What's more, there were no casualties because the Dutch forgot that they were at war with the Isles. It wasn't until a Scilly historian contacted the Dutch about the war in 1985 and received the information that the war was still technically going that a peace treaty was signed in 1986. Can you just imagine if they gathered to end this war and the leaders started arguing about who won? So much so that a real war would break out. It's common practice to wear the bottom button of a vest or waistcoat undone. Sometimes vests are even cut with the bottom edge curving away so that the button is purely decorative. The reason for this is that Edward VII of England was a chonker. He undid his bottom button for gut comfort, and it turned into the style as courtiers imitated him. Relatedly, the fashion of wearing wigs, which prevailed in European fashion for 150 years, started because the French king got bald and needed one. Hernando de Soto is responsible for the collapse of several North American civilizations and the deaths of untold millions of people. He and his band of men were the first Europeans to make a concerted expedition into what's now the USA. He started in Florida and eventually his men made it to Louisiana, with many detours along the way. De Soto dies along the way, but that's unimportant. What's important is that they brought about 300 pigs with them for food because they breed quickly and can live off almost anything. Unfortunately, they also serve as a host for various diseases that humans are susceptible to. Lots of the pigs escaped, reproduced, destroyed farmland, and spread diseases. By the time the next Europeans came to those areas, the civilizations De Soto and his men saw had utterly collapsed, and the population had catastrophically fallen as well. Similarly, the vast numbers of buffalo and passenger pigeons are thought to be the result of the death of North American native peoples and the collapse of their civilizations, particularly the ability to maintain agricultural systems. That's also thought to be tied to a period of global cooling as an entire continent's worth of people stopped using fire to control plant growth and forests expanded massively, resulting in vast amounts of CO2 being pulled from the atmosphere. Magellan is not the first person to circumnavigate the globe. He never made it. He died in the Philippines. There was a 100-hour war between El Salvador and Honduras in 1969. The war caused the death of about 3,000 people. The war was triggered by a football or soccer game. It has been known as the Football War. Other than the whole football part, this conflict is known for having the last actual dogfights between piston-engined, prop-driven fighters. Honduras had the 4, 5, and 5N variants of the F4U Corsair, while the Salvadorian Air Force had some beat-up Corsairs and some demilitarized P-51 Mustangs, which they rearmed and set up. One Honduras pilot even had 3 kills during the short conflict. You didn't have to be ethnically Spanish to be a conquistador. There were conquistadors from England and Germany, but the rules to become one involved Hispanicizing your name and converting to Catholicism if you weren't already Catholic. The sound made by the Krakatoa volcanic eruption in 1883 was so loud it ruptured eardrums of the people 40 miles away, traveled around the world 4 times, and was clearly heard 3,000 miles away. That's like you standing in New York and hearing the sound from San Francisco. There's a tribe in Vanuatu that worships Prince Philip as a literal god. There was a TV show on it where they came over to England to meet him and experienced snow for the first time. It was fascinating. On the Lewis and Clark expedition, a vote regarding what direction they should go was held on the coast of Washington amongst the party members. This vote included Sacagawea and York, Lewis's slave. Thus, because the expedition was funded by the US military, this was the first time in American history where a woman and a black man were allowed to participate in a vote of any kind related to government affairs. Pope Gregory IX called for black cats to be killed, as he believed they are incarnations of Satan. The mass killing of cats increased the number of rats in Europe. The increased number of rats helped to spread the plague all throughout Europe. He also had a steam yacht called the Saucy Sue, which was moored off the coast of the West Indies, in which he hosted the entire England cricket team and the Balinese goddess of plenty. That Blackadder quote probably didn't deserve a place in this list of historical events, but it made me laugh, and hopefully it made you laugh too, listener. Legend holds that the Renaissance artist Raphael died of exhaustion and fatigue due to excessive fornication with his mistress, Fornarina. That sounds like something Raphael would want to be said about him after his death. Tell everyone that I died banging that chick. His buddies Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Donatello all agree to spread the lie. Thomas Jefferson collected so many books in his lifetime that he would go into debt. After the British burned Washington, D.C. in the Battle of 1812, he had sold most of his books to the Library of Congress to replace those that were lost in the fire. Jefferson had spent 50 years accumulating a wide variety of books in several languages and in many subjects, including philosophy, science, literature, architecture, law, religion, and mathematics. The nearly 6,500 books netted him $23,950. The sum is from so long ago that you actually can't calculate its modern worth. We can do those calculations since 1913 when we instituted the Federal Reserve and started tracking inflation. In 1913, that $23,950 would have been worth a little over $600,000. If you use a standard inflation rate of 3% from years 1812 to 1913, it becomes about 11 million. But inflation was probably much higher, especially when taking into account the debt we went into for the Civil War and the Reconstruction, which was over $2 billion in real 1865 dollars. 26th President Theodore Roosevelt was an ardent supporter of William Howard Taft. The two were longtime friends, and Taft was Roosevelt's most trusted cabinet member. When Roosevelt's latter term came to a close, he successfully campaigned for Taft's election to the presidency. However, when Taft began enacting many policies that his predecessor found disagreeable, Roosevelt grew sour toward his friend. He vied for the Republican presidential nomination and failed. He then literally marched his supporters out of the Republican Convention Hall and created a new party. Under this party's new banner, Roosevelt split the Republican vote and ensured Taft's defeat. This leads to the story of the attempted assassination of Roosevelt when he was on his way to give a speech. His 90-minute, several pages long speech was folded up in his steel eyeglass case, and the bullet went through the steel and paper, losing enough momentum that it wasn't able to puncture his lungs. Roosevelt felt the shot, but he saw he wasn't bleeding heavily or coughing up blood, so he figured he wasn't in immediate danger and gave the 90-minute speech anyway. He started the speech by saying, "I don't know whether you fully understand that I've just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose." A spiritualist who believed in harnessing orgone energy, as in energy from the human climax, sent Einstein what is fundamentally a nonsense machine for harnessing the energy. Einstein spent an afternoon trying to analyze this thing before sending an apologetic letter explaining that this machine was just nonsense. Albert Einstein could also have been president of Israel when it was formed, but he declined. Gladiators endorsed products like modern-day sports stars do. They also rarely died and had, for the time, incredible healthcare. The costs sunk into a star gladiator were immense. Having them die would be a huge loss. Untrained slaves and animals were a different story, of course. I'd actually like to see a modern gladiatorial renaissance myself. Maybe sans animal cruelty and slavery, of course. Medieval combat sports are sort of getting there. Thomas Jefferson had a ram as a pet. He called it the abominable animal. It was aggressive as heck, and Jefferson usually tied it outside buildings he was in, and it attacked a lot of people just walking by it. It even killed a boy. He only had it killed once it started attacking his other sheep. WTF, Thomas. Maybe I've been watching too much Hamilton, but outside his intellect, Jefferson doesn't seem to have had a whole lot of redeeming qualities. The American invasion fleet for the Philippines during World War II was saved from complete destruction by a small support group named Taffy 3, composed of 13 smaller support vessels. The Japanese fleet meant to destroy the invasion force was made up of nearly twice as many larger fighting ships, including 4 battleships, one of which was the super battleship Yamato. The escort carriers, which were merely converted merchants' vessels, could not outrun any of the Japanese vessels. Taffy 3 did not have any guns larger than 5 inches. To put it in comparison, the anti-aircraft guns of some of the larger vessels in the Japanese fleet had similar caliber guns. Yamato alone outweighed every ship in Taffy 3 combined. The battle itself was one of the largest mismatches in naval history. The carriers scrambled every aircraft they had on board, which was close to up to 400 aircraft. The destroyers and destroyer escorts laid a smokescreen for the carriers. One of them made a headlong charge directly at the larger Japanese force to get into launching range for the torpedoes. Other vessels took their example and made similar torpedo runs. One torpedo sheared off the bow of the heavy cruiser Kumano, another crippled the heavy cruiser Chokai. The aircraft repeatedly strafed, bombed, and even depth-charged the fleet. Once they ran out of ammo, they continued to make dry runs at ships so as to distract the gunners from firing on friendly vessels. There were reports of pilots flinging empty Coke bottles, charts, and clipboards at ships. One pilot pulled his .45 caliber Colt and shot at a cruiser with it. The Japanese made several errors in the engagement, including the order of a general attack, which meant each vessel could engage and maneuver freely. This made a lot of miscommunication and confusion. They also misidentified the small escort carriers for larger ones, because of the crap ton of aircraft airborne, and also mistook the small destroyers as heavy cruisers. These errors made Taffy 3 look like the outer elements of a much larger American fleet. Thinking this, the Japanese admiral regathered his forces and retreated. This gave enough time for Taffy 3 to retreat and alert the main American fleet, which had been distracted by another Japanese fleet meant to lure them away. It sailed back and bombed the crap out of the remaining warships of the original Japanese fleet. The stories of heroism and bravery on board the American vessels are almost unbelievable. The story of the battle itself is also quite interesting, including when a single shot from the 5-inch Stinger gun of a carrier managed to cripple a heavy cruiser. In conclusion, American fleet composed of support vessels fought a Japanese task force several times larger than it and won. Saved tens of thousands of lives. English teachers. What is the most disturbing story/assessment a student has ever submitted? English teacher here. Had an 8th grade student write a "My life at this moment" letter to themselves that they write at the beginning of the year and read to themselves at the end. I always have a rule that they get full credit if I can just see writing on it and it's coherent English. Though if they definitely don't want me to read it, they should staple it and I'll just look for writing. I had a girl who went over the top to look, act and sound, and be a boy. She wasn't trans, so I was a bit confused on how exactly she wanted to be viewed. So I just pretended she was tomboy-ish. She was also insanely defiant to her male teachers, and I worked my butt off to build a relationship with her. She wouldn't have it, though I was kind as I could be. Anyway, the time of year came for me to pass back their letters. By this time, this girl had been moved to a digital learning lab and had been isolated from the Gen Pop. I passed all the letters out and found hers had been left unstapled, though I didn't remember reading it or noticing it wasn't sealed. Curiosity overcame me, so I opened it. My heart broke when I read her rather detailed desire to be away from her stepdad by the end of the year, and her goal for that year was to escape the godforsaken hellhole. Long story short, that letter ended up being used in court to put her stepdad away for committing the unspeakable act against her viciously for many years. I felt bad for her, but hopefully she's been able to move on, though I doubt it. The description was pretty rough of what he did to her. I teach high school creative writing, and I gave an assignment where students had to rewrite a fairy tale from the perspective of the villain or a smaller character, like the giant or golden goose in Jack and the Beanstalk. A young woman asked me if she could submit a fan fiction she had already started, and I said of course, as long as she finished it and followed the instructions. She submitted a Tangled fan fiction, but it was actually a story where the prince goes in and commits the unspeakable act against the evil queen, and it was graphic. I had to call her parents, counselors, principals. It was a whole thing, and very awkward. From that point on, I had to explicitly tell my students that I was a mandated reporter and what that means, and that they had to keep everything PG. Last year, a 5th grade student submitted a poem into our fair contest. Every student in the whole school K5 submits something, so they don't really get read. They just hang them up at the fair and slap a first place sticker on half and a second place sticker on the other half. His poem, which I cannot completely remember, went something like this. That is my girl. She's a lot of fun. If something you said tries to steal her, I'll take my gun and I'll shoot your head. With a picture to accompany it. Someone browsing the poems at the fair had a fit about it, and we had to call his mum and have a talk and everything. It was really great when the mum asked why in the world there was a big first place sticker on it. Well, it's good to see that the judges were as attentive as the people putting the poems up. Consistency all round. In a university English class, we had a weekly peer review assignment. One dude in the group I was assigned turned in a story, a fiction about werewolves and college students, best friends out in a pre-graduation cabin in the woods party, and it was bad. His writing style was so terrible and immature? We all ended up messaging the instructor individually to find out how much work we were expected to put in to editing his story. Normally we would comment on the story, with whatever little corrections may need to be made, but this thing was all run-on sentences and wrong grammar. It was nuts. For example, The friend was running in the woods as the other guy was driving at her as he tried to hit her as the other friends screamed as the werewolf chased the car as he hit her as she rolled on the roof of the car and the werewolf found her body as she was trying to get up. It was brutal. He was taking the class to be a screenwriter. I still feel bad for him, and it's been over a decade. I would like to tell a story on behalf of my high school creative writing teacher, because I know how much she hated one of my projects, because she refused to display it with everyone else's. We had an assignment to write a poem from the perspective of a person facing a difficult life choice. We were to display our poem three-dimensionally, however we liked, written on a pyramid, words hanging from a mobile, etc., etc. I decided I wanted to write a poem about a man during the Blitz, who abandons his family in terror and runs out into the night to die in the bombing. The poem that I still remember, word for word, 2 fricking decades later, is as follows. The smile rests upon my face, shows not my fallen grace. You see the hell I was exposed, that caused my fearful juxtapose, caused me to leave my family and save myself in time of need. I am the doorstep to the grave, my hell-bent path forever paved. I then took this clearly deranged poem and scribbled it in black marker in concentric circles around a very realistic plastic skull I had brought in for the occasion. I gave this crime against nature to my very nice, very liberal creative art teacher who wondered why she had chosen to create this assignment in the first place. She gave me an A and refused to display it with the rest of the normal class projects, clearly the best decision for everyone involved. One of my kids was from Mexico and wrote about watching his neighbors get gunned down by the cartel. Because he and his dad had seen it, they told the police and offered to try to help. While they were talking with the police, they let them into the crime scene, and he wrote about his shoes turning red because they got wet with so much blood. It absolutely broke my heart. He was 11 and said that that was the reason his family came to America. All of these remind me of the time when my little brother wrote a story about our cat that got squished by a door. The teacher contacted my mum saying that she was worried if the story was true. We don't have a cat. A kid wrote a whole story detailing exactly how he was going to murder me. He came in with a knife a month later and tried to stab another boy in the back. I hope he's doing better now. When I was in high school, I wrote a hypothetical story about a drowning person. Every detail was written so that it would imply an incoming rescue. The essay continuously was hopeful about the fate of the person. I prolonged the narrative till the end. In the last sentence, I write something along the lines of, the person is just drowning and slipping to the end of the sea, where they would never be found. I'm glad I'm not the only one who scared their teacher by writing this sort of assignment from the perspective of a drowning person. I'm sorry, 4th form English teacher. I promise I didn't have a death wish. Had my kids write a faux cover letter for a year abroad in Australia, in which they, among other things, had to give reasons why they wanted to go to Australia. Here's what one of my students came up with. I'd like to see some wild animals, koalas, kangaroos, and maybe some aborigines. Guy claimed it wasn't meant to be as racist as it looks at the first glance, and that he simply messed up at the construction. And I actually tend to believe it, seeing as how it was an ESL class in Germany, and he really wasn't one of the top students of the class. But then, in another essay, would you rather do an internship or a paid summer job? He said that he'd do the summer job, so he'd have money for gambling, so he definitely was a bit on the weird side. I remember for my English class, we had a project that we were supposed to do over the entire year and turn it in at the end. I had the idea to write a series of horror story vignettes for mine. I did not hold back with the language or graphic violence. I wrote a story about a guy who is very depressed and tries to kill himself, but is saved by a beautiful woman and they get married and have kids. And then one day they're at a mall and a gunman fatally shoots his family in front of him. And he slowly loses his mind through the rest of the story and ends up doing what the gunman did and kills another family and then kills himself. Another story was about a man whose addict best friend goes missing and tries to find him, then ends up being trapped in a torture-like compound, where he is then forced to murder his friend to get out, only to find that the compound was never ending. I got a 100 and the best grade in the class. My teacher said they were so well written she found herself crying and losing sleep over the stories, so she thought I deserved a good grade. I'm sorry, Mrs. Creelman. Had a student submit a paper about growing up with an addict teen brother. He had the room next to her, and sometimes when getting clean, the parents would lock him in his room, and he would have raging withdrawals. She was very young, so I imagine there was a lot of medical care and therapy going on that she didn't know about. She just remembered that her brother was screaming and crying in the next room, and she would sit in her closet all night long, terrified he was going to break through the wall and get her. It was such a heart-rending story, and it made me view what families go through in such a different light. Second-hand account from a colleague submitted during a workshop in an undergraduate non-fiction writing class. Story was about 18 pages and was submitted by a 50-ish male. Talks about a 12-year-old girl who is not the man's daughter but belongs to him and is his wife. Talking about how they like to stroke her and caress her nude body and make her eat things out of her hand. They put collars on her and constantly refer to her perfect hairy undercarriage and so forth. The rest of the class read the story for the workshop and in disgust and horror email the professor, colleague, who immediately cancelled the workshop and contacted administration about the student. The thing is, everyone was so shocked by the nature of the story that no one got to the very last line in which it is revealed that the girl is a cat. Obviously the student was looking for some sort of reaction, which he got. Abuse, abuse, and more abuse. Assigning anything that asks them to reflect on something personal or write something creative has a high chance of yielding stories about abuse. These stories very likely reflect real experiences. Many a visit are paid to the guidance counselors and school therapists. If you don't work with kids, you might be shocked to learn just how many people are abused in some fashion. If you add in how many kids aren't abused but just have a bad upbringing, it gets really, really depressing. Yes, I thought there would be a lot more funny stories in this topic, but it turns out the keyword was disturbing, so here are some stories that shocked me. I hope we all have our eyes opened a little. Now, let's at least throw some levity in here with this next one. Someone wrote a fan fiction of her and Kermit the Frog, and I've not been the same since. Students were annotating old news articles about a very famous axe murderer from the late 1800s. One student includes an annotation about how the article reminded her of her father. She helpfully included his name for me to Google, and yep, that's how I found out my student's dad is literally an axe murderer. Second place goes to a student who wrote from the point of view of the Zodiac Killer for a creative writing assignment. It was incredibly well written. If it hadn't been, it honestly might not have been so disturbing. But being in the killer's head as he ties up and stabs young couples to death? No thanks. Oh, and last week someone submitted a horror story in creative writing. I swear to God, she could be a writer for the Saw movies. The deaths were graphic and gruesome and creative. I had to take breaks while reading it because I'm pretty squeamish. It might get buried, but I need to chime in, mostly in the hopes that this student finds my comment and knows how much his story stuck with me. The first assignment of the semester was to write about life at the university through a sociological lens. This guy who was social, well-liked, in a frat turned in this shocking story. He was writing about how hard his life was, how he had to scrounge for meals from the trash while seeing all the other students eat happily in the dining halls. He described how he'd seen his friends struck by cars on the winding mountain roads on campus. I was so taken back, and I kept reading anxiously to see if the story would take a turn. A squirrel. The kid was writing from the perspective of a squirrel. This kid was a genius. I told him later how impressed I was, and he shrugs in a very bro way, stating, "That's the worst thing I've ever written. If you see this, Matt, that's still my favorite paper by a student." Not an English teacher, but when I was in junior college, I was a TA for a psych instructor, and I read and graded essays. There was an assignment for students to create an experiment where they trained themselves to create a habit by rewarding themselves after the task. Think Pavlov. One male student wrote about his experiment. He chose to train himself to jerk it more often, and his reward was more jerking. And he wrote about it in detail. Very sustainable system, but so weird to submit to your instructor. I have my high school students write a defining moment memoir about a moment where their lives changed in a significant way. I generally see some stories about childhood abuse and things of that nature where I make sure our social work team is aware of their claims. They're getting support, and that's basically it. However, I did once get a story about the first time a girl in my class had smoked Mary J. Except the whole thing was written with the substance anthropomorphized as a beautiful woman named Mary, that she met and took on a beautiful all-night date. This thing was about 3 pages long and graphic. We're talking full anatomical descriptions of lesbian fun times as an analogy for the experience of getting lit for the first time. It just kept going, and it was extremely well written to the point that I was really uncomfortable reading it, and had to put it away. The worst part is, she was super excited for me to read it and came in the next day asking about it. "Did you like it? I'm super proud." And I had to basically say, "Yeah, it's super well written, but honestly, I just can't be reading something like that written by one of my students." As someone whose childhood was mundane and drama-free, the idea of having to write a memoir about a defining moment of my life to that point would send me into a blind panic of, what the frick do I possibly write about? Even now, as an adult, I would struggle to pick any one moment that changed my life. I'm right there with you, commenter. Even at the age of 30, I'm not entirely sure I could pinpoint any single defining moment. I like to think that they happen on a day-to-day basis. I like the next commenter's approach to the problem. Freshman year of college, I took a class called Interpersonal Communication. One of the projects was that we had to make a presentation introducing ourselves to the class and talk about the moments in our lives that we found significant and/or were proud of. The bulk of my presentation was about the fact that I was 19 and from a middle-class family in the suburbs of nowhere, and aside from not failing at life up to that point, I didn't really have any major achievements I was proud of. My teacher was annoyed, but I fulfilled all of the requirements, so I think I got like a B. Really though, I would have felt like a jackass standing in front of a group of people talking about basic life crap as if they were accomplishments. Right after an older, non-traditional student had presented an entirety of their life, having children, grandchildren, etc. That person had decades more experience and actual life accomplishments to talk about. I was just some dumb kid. I'm still a dumb kid even though I'm 26, but that's life. Basically a manifesto about how the student felt ostracized from the school and how he wanted revenge. This was a community college. He was a freshman. Over the semester, I could tell he struggled, yet he was also insanely talented. Some of the other students in class bullied him in my presence, and let's just say I didn't tolerate that at all. I spent extra time talking to him and trying to help him one-on-one. One day he turns in an assignment talking about his desire to exact revenge for his marginalization. He was triggered when everyone on his floor conspired to trick him to go outside, at night and in the middle of winter, and then they locked him out of the dorm. Buttholes. I spoke with him immediately about it, and he assured me it was just hyperbole. Regardless, I did have to notify my supervisor. I also spoke with his RA, but the RA couldn't care less. The student ended up dropping out shortly after this. We stayed in touch for a bit, but after a while I don't know what happened to him. He was probably the smartest student I had in that class, yet he couldn't make it because of his own personal problems and torment from other students. Ugh. I was working with a small group of Year 7 students, and we did this exercise where the kids have to create a story using a randomly assigned setting, character, and theme. So this one boy ends up with a war zone, a princess, and unrequited love. He proceeded to turn these innocuous prompts into a hilariously messed up story. Set during World War II, it's told from the perspective of the Princess of the UK, who wakes up on the battlefield to find German soldiers shooting at her. Suddenly, someone behind her kills her attackers. She turns around to see her rescuer. It's the leader of the Third Reich. In fear, she runs into a medical tent. He is in close pursuit. In the tent, she decides to confront the Führer, but upon locking eyes with him, realizes he's the most beautiful man she's ever seen, falling in love immediately. He, however, walks right past her and kisses a passing nurse. Furious and jealous, the Princess of the UK kills the nurse in a fit of rage, then flees the medical tent, returning to the battlefield before the sad and baffling conclusion to the story. And then I died. So not disturbing as such, but certainly unexpected. I teach, but not English. I had to once write up a middle school student, I don't remember for what, but it was serious since I hate writing up, and they turned in their assignment for that day with none of it done. In its place was a half-page description of all the things their dad would do to them if he found out they were written up again. It started pretty mild, say, take the phone away, to more serious things like no food or water. By the time I saw it, they were already out the door, so I hopped over to the counselor and let them have a copy of it. Not sure what happened after that since it was out of my hands, and I'm not sure if it was true or not. They tended to be overdramatic and stretch the truth in class, but I took it very seriously. I've definitely been more purposeful and welcoming in my interactions with them from here on out. Got to make sure that the classroom is a safe and good place for them. I was the student. We were told to create an invention that'll help the human race. Basically write 3 paragraphs down and turn it in. Several classmates came up with machines to stop cancer, medical equipment, things to help homeless people. I'm at a loss, so I decided to rip off the self-euthanizing machine from Futurama and basically wrote down that you can choose fast, slow, painful, or painless death. It can help people who have painful diseases die for just a quarter. Needless to say, I was put on a close watch list, and I had a counselor until I graduated high school. We have middle schoolers put together a portfolio at the end of the year for all of their reading logs, and the essay they are most proud of, and a revision of their essay that they think they could improve the most. It's a big culmination project that involves a letter at the beginning to the grader where they need to explain what they've learned and how their habits have changed and stuff like that. Easily some of the funniest crap I've ever read in those letters, and I still have pictures of my favorite intros, but the most disturbing one was about a boy who explained in detail that he broke his habit of not doing his reading by reading while he poops. I've been given some pretty gruesome horror story stuff, but it's usually based on crap the students have watched. This week alone, I've read 2 Red Dead Redemption 2 ripoffs, so I'd settle for anything original. Not a teacher, but when I was in 9th grade, a kid in my class wrote a story about a student planting bombs around the school, and a group of students teaming up to defuse the bombs and catch him. It was pretty cool, but it lost its luster when the kid made a bomb threat to the school a week later. Maybe not exactly what you were looking for, but I'm an ESL teacher. One class we were talking about different holidays and how we celebrate them. This one student was trying to explain Mother's Day, but didn't know the exact name of it. When I asked him to explain the holiday so I could tell him the name we use, he said, "It's the day where I pleasure my mother." When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.